Okay, did you say we're ready? All right. Good morning again, everyone. It's Friday, August 12th. We're in Casper at the lovely Thyra Thompson State Office Building, and we are here to consider this morning mental health services for juveniles with court-ordered placement. We have known quite a lot about mental health services, less about court-ordered placements, so it should be informative for us all. So I see that we have DFS first on the agenda. Have we got some folks online? Lindsay, welcome. Come on up. Probably the seats have cooled off from yesterday, but so Ms. Schilling, because we don't spend as much time on this committee thinking about court-ordered issues, make sure to go slowly on some of the acronym side on the judiciary sort of theme for some of us.
Good morning. So my name is Lindsay Schilling. I'm the Senior Administrator for the Department of Family Services. And I actually have the director online that's going to walk through the presentation. So I got the slides.
Okay. Can you arrange your paper and your mic just a little bit to pick you up a little bit closer?
Yeah.
I think that'd be better. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yep. Okay. So you're going to run the slides while Director Schmidt talks? Is that what's happening? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. It'll be sort of like watching a subtitled movie. Carry on, all of you then.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Co-Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Corin Schmidt, and I'm the Director of the Wyoming Department of Family Services. Thank you for allowing me to participate via video today. I have an exciting opportunity to meet with one of our high-level federal counterparts in Denver this afternoon, and so I think that will be very worthwhile. So I may be exiting a little early, but certainly Ms. Schilling knows this content as well as I do, and will be able to step in at any time. So next slide. Madam Co-Chairwoman, I heard your comment about how this is a little bit different than maybe some of the other conversations that we've had around adolescent mental health services. And the way that we devised our presentation really is through the eyes of the Department of Family Services, with an emphasis on the judicial interaction we have with within our system. So today we'll talk about the Department of Family Services continuum, what we can do in any of these given situations, and walk through voluntary court actions and then the court-ordered placement options. Toward the end, we'll be talking about some of the problems we've identified with juvenile mental health services, some potential strategies, and then other policy interventions and opportunities. So Why Home Matters is a framework that we are trying to, it's a lens that we're trying to create so that when we talk about families and when we talk about children, we're thinking about what they need to stay safely at home. We believe that with opportunities for success and supporting people in the community, supporting the family, supporting our partners, that more children can stay safely at home and reduce the number of out-of-home placements. We believe that families do better at home, and if children are having to come into care, that a foster family is the first best choice, and then we look at the continuum. So the focus for us has really been switching to a prevention orientation, because once children engage with our system, oftentimes they're in crisis mode and they're at a place where they need a high level of care. Our preference is that we engage with those families very early on, provide community-based services so those children can stay safe at home. So the continuum of services really starts with voluntary, but most of what we do is under a court action and court placement. So voluntary services. DFS can be involved with any family that comes to us for assistance. There's not a need to have some sort of court involvement for us to be able to support families. However, parents can choose not to accept the services. At this point, it's all voluntary on behalf of the agency, on behalf of the family. This is really where we're focusing our energy more, is to try to work with community providers and our sister agencies on ways that we can support them quicker when immediate needs are identified, rather than waiting for them to get to a place where the system then has to get involved. Primarily what we offer are case management services. We can do temporary placements, but they're time limited. So we really rely heavily on the skills and the great skills of case management that our workers have to work with the families, to look at what resources we can pull in and have available, work with the Department of Health and their various programs, and then certainly with the schools. We also have available to us crisis services that are offered by local providers. Some call those crisis homes. These are temporary placements where a parent can voluntarily place a youth, not so much a child, but a youth, for somewhat of a timeout. So they can de-escalate the situation, work with the family so that the child can go home. But that is a temporary placement and it is voluntary. However, the department does pay for those services. So court actions, there's actually 3 ways that the department becomes legally involved with a child or family. The first one is through the Child Protection Act. This is where we get involved because of allegations of abuse or neglect. So if there's an allegation of neglect or abuse, we will investigate it. If we determine that there has been abuse or neglect, we will work with the county attorney to file a petition, and then the court will determine what happens next. So do we take the child into protective custody? Do we work with the family and leave the child at home? Or also under this act is the ability for law enforcement and medical professionals to take protective custody. DFS does not have the authority to take or remove kids. Only medical personnel, the courts, and law enforcement have that ability. We provide a lot of assistance, and certainly we work very closely with our partners in this particular area, but DFS does not have the ability to just enter a home and remove a child. The next act is the Juvenile Justice Act, and that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today. This is when a child has committed a crime, some sort of offense, that then is filed in juvenile court. This is a little bit misleading because juvenile justice is much larger than DFS and juvenile court interaction. Juvenile delinquency can occur at the circuit court level if a kid is cited for maybe an MIP, a minor in possession, or some sort of vandalism or some sort of fine. It's the county attorney that decides whether that child and the child's behavior should be addressed in juvenile court or if it should stay in the court in which it was cited. So that could be circuit court or municipal court. So through the Juvenile Justice Act, when a child is deemed to be a delinquent under this act, there are a couple things that can happen. The child can be put on probation, or the child could come into the custody of the state. And that's a lot of what we'll be discussing throughout. So this is the Juvenile Justice Act is juvenile delinquents who've been determined to be delinquent by a juvenile court judge, not to be confused with a kid underage who commits a crime. And then the last is the Child in Need of Supervision Act. And this is really for kids that haven't committed a crime, so to speak, but are basically, quote unquote, incorrigible. They may have absenteeism issues, truancy, They may have some mental health needs. They may have behavioral needs. But the child in and of itself hasn't done anything specifically wrong, like a delinquent, committed a crime. But for some reason, the family or the child may need additional services that the agency can provide. So for any one of these, a petition is filed by the district or county attorney for review by the district court judge. And then the district court judge makes a legal determination, adjudication, or a finding. So going back up to the 3 petitions, the judge determines whether the child was neglected or abused, whether the child is a delinquent, or whether a child is in need of a supervision. However, once that child comes into the door, no matter how they got in, most of the same services are offered to all of them. So when we talk about court-ordered placements, it's not just about delinquents. It can also be for children who have been neglected and abused, or children in need of supervision. So the court actions, when a child has been adjudicated or one of the findings has been made in one of those 3 areas, the judge assigns what's called a multidisciplinary team. And depending on the child and the family, the members of the team will vary. But there are required members that include the Department of Family Services, in some cases, the guardian ad litem, and I believe Mr. Belcher is there and he can speak more to that. Sometimes it's a public defender, oftentimes in the case of a juvenile delinquent. It can be a parent's attorney, which is in the case for an abuse and neglect, a mental health provider if necessary, the schools, and a few others, and I can't remember who I've missed. So it's based on multidisciplinary team meetings that DFS creates a case plan. So in conjunction with this group of people, DFS writes a case plan that says, here are the expectations, or here are the requirements for the family, the youth, what have you, that kind of lays out a roadmap for providing the child services, but most importantly, trying to return the child, if in a placement, as home as soon as possible.
Excuse me, Director Schmidt. I have a question here from Representative Connolly.
Sure.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Corin, it's nice to hear you. I'm curious if there's anything that's statutory that says who is obligated to be on an MDT, or is it always simply what or who the judge wants?
Director.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Connolly, nice to see you. There is a mandatory list via statute that the judge shall appoint. Now, sometimes that's not always the case depending on the community, but statute does list a required MDT within some voluntary options.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So the case plan may also include requirements for mental health evaluation and treatment. And that is part of the bigger discussion today. What we know is that children entering our system more than likely have had, I don't want to say substantial trauma because I don't think it's substantial, but certainly trauma in some way or another. In order for the state to have this level of involvement, and this is a heavily governmentally involved process, there has to be some underlying issues that are occurring with the family or with the child, his or herself. So the mental health and evaluation and treatment is a key part to the case plan. Treatment may include an out-of-home placement, meaning that there's a determination the services that the child needs can't be provided, or that the home is not safe for the child, so that the child goes into some sort of out-of-home placement. Children in state custody, and this is important because this is when we start to connect with our biggest sister agency, the Department of Health. Children in state custody per a juvenile court action are eligible for Medicaid. Why they are eligible for Medicaid is because they're considered to be in foster care. Sometimes we think about foster care as just homes, but from the federal definition, foster care is an out-of-home placement. If they've been removed and placed, they're in foster care. So Medicaid plays a significant role in the adolescent or the services that mental health services provided to a child and their family. Per statute, then, there are regular judicial reviews on the case plan, including treatment progress. So depending on the community, MDTs will be meeting regularly. Some meet once a month, some meets once a quarter, but there are regular judicial reviews where the case plan and all of the parties appear before the judge and talk about how they're doing. So again, this is a pretty substantial level of involvement by state entities in the courts. So just to give you some idea of the types of cases DFS works with, the types of families, about 62% of our work is around child protection, which are those children who have been neglected and abused. 30% are for juvenile delinquents. That is going back to those 3 doors. These are kids that have been determined or adjudicated to be delinquent. Children in need of supervision are about 8%. And that has typically been low. And you can see fairly consistently over the 5 years, those percentages have remained true. So the majority of our work is really around children who have been neglected and abused, with about a third being those who have been adjudicated delinquent.
Corin, I do have one other question to interrupt here. So I see the numbers going down, and I remember during the peak of COVID, there was a downturn, and the impression we got was because of that the schools are often the reporter of the child abuse cases. I'm kind of surprised to see that it's not rebounded more in fiscal year 22 with the return to school. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Madam Chairwoman, my thoughts are theoretical, and but what I believe has happened is that families and the amount of services that were provided through COVID really did help to keep more children safely at home. All of our attention became focused on supporting families as opposed to looking at what we can do just for the child, his or herself. And I think that's been one of the problems with our system, is that we are so child-centered that we don't always recognize what services the families need in order to safely protect those children. So certainly the infusion of a lot of the additional services and the additional dollars, I think, were helpful in that way. However, it doesn't necessarily explain, since we've in Wyoming haven't been in a COVID situation for a couple of years or so, the decreased numbers, other than I think people maybe started to rely more on community-based services. However, that's completely theoretical. Also, during this time is we didn't have a lot of movement of children from placement to placement. And so because of COVID and restrictions that facilities had, and now we're facing the same thing, but the restrictions are really because of staffing, not because of COVID. We really don't have as many options for placement as we did before. We still have a number of beds, but we cannot fill those beds because there's just not a lot of staff. And that's something we'll get into later. So I do believe that then that's forced all of us to be a little bit more creative and think about what we can do to keep the child safely in the community rather than having to go to some sort of out-of-home placement. So as I said, our preference, when possible, is to keep children home, safe at home. And mental health services in that case are provided on an outpatient basis by community providers. This is where we rely heavily on our community mental health and substance abuse centers. This is where I think a lot of the behavioral health reform is essential for us to be able to do our best to keep children safely at home. There's a third of the cases that we work with voluntarily end up in placement because of mental health and substance use issues by the family. If a child can't stay safely at home, then our preference, as I said, is in a relative or stranger's home. So our first preference, if we do have to remove the child and the child is placed, is with somebody that they know. And relative in this context is a little bit more extended. It could be family friend, it can be some sort of previous caregiver. But the idea is that if a child can't stay with his or her parents, then we really want that child to be with somebody that they know. Removing a child from his or her parents in and of itself is an extremely traumatic event. The children do not necessarily recognize that their situation is dangerous, even though we recognize their situation is dangerous. And taking that child causes a lot of trauma on that child because oftentimes they don't understand why. So to pick a child up and place them with strangers in the middle of the night really can have an intensive effect, and there's more research that's coming out about that. So if a child can't be at home safely, we really try hard to look for somebody that they know so that we can place them there. Once a child has been taken into protective custody and they're in foster care, the traditional foster care that you think of, that's a home-based foster care. Mental health services are provided via Medicaid on an outpatient basis. The child attends local school, hopefully the school that they've always attended. And then DFS really essentially pays foster parents for room and board. So we're paying them just to take care of the child. Court-ordered placement statutes, though, when you think about it from a level that's a congregate care level, there's statutes that govern how and when we place. So the court-ordered placement statutes called COPS, and that's what you commonly hear it referred to as COPS. COPS placements are the placements of children in residential treatment centers, group homes, day treatment programs, and juvenile detention facilities. This is kind of a three-legged stool. So in a court-ordered placement, typically, not always, but typically, the Department of Family Services pays for room and board. The Department of Education pays for education, and then the Department of Health pays for treatment. So that's via Medicaid. Group homes. Group homes in our mind is the lowest level of care in a congregate care situation. And what congregate care means is that there's typically more than, I think, 5 kids or so in a given placement. So this is kind of your facility. For those of you, many of you have group homes in your communities. Group home services are provided by, for example, the Yes House, Cathedral Home, to name a few, but we have quite a few group home services within the state. In this case, the child attends local school, DFS pays room and board, but the mental health services, again, are on an outpatient basis. So treatment is provided by a community provider through Medicaid. We do not see this as a treatment placement. While children may be placed here that have treatment needs, we do not see this as a place they go for treatment, if that difference is understood. Residential treatment centers, however, are just that, treatment centers. So when a child is determined to need this level of care, a residential treatment center, they can also be duly certified as a qualified residential treatment center. The child is living at the facility. So Medicaid services, mental health services are provided by the facility to the child. But again, those services are funded through Medicaid. The education occurs on facility grounds, and the Department of Education pays for that. Then the Department of Family Services provides funding for room and board. So this is a treatment level of care. Again, We mostly use our in-state providers. Sometimes we have to use out-of-state providers, but there's pretty strict requirements that we walk through in order to make that determination. Also available to us are BOCES. Those are the Boards of Cooperative Education Services. There are 3 BOCES in our state that provide a residential setting, one in Gillette, one in Thermopolis, and then one in Jackson or Wilson. These are the mental health services, again, are provided on site and funded by Medicaid. But these are typically educational placements, which means that their educational needs, the child's educational needs cannot be met in their local district and therefore require some sort of placement in order to provide the needed educational services. And then we pay funding for room and board. Then the highest level of treatment is a psychiatric residential treatment facility, a PRTF, and you're going to you hear that term a lot. You heard it yesterday when you were talking about the PRTF rate restructure. A psychiatric residential treatment facility is a Medicaid medical level of care. The court cannot just place a child in a PRTF. There has to be a determination made first by a medical provider that says this child needs this level of care. It is a psychiatric level of care. And in our state, we have 2 providers, as you met yesterday, WBI and St. Joseph's. So first and foremost, before a child can enter a PRTF, Medicaid says, is there a medical determination that this treatment level is medically necessary? And if that is true, if the child meets that criteria, then Medicaid pays a daily rate. So they're paying room and board, they're paying for the treatment. Department of Education still pays for education. So this is one place where DFS does not pay for the service. Then we have the Wyoming Boys School and Girls School. And the Wyoming Boys School and Girls School are available to many of the children in custody, but they have to be determined to be delinquent. So that Juvenile Justice Act door that we mentioned early on, the court has to say this child is a delinquent before a placement at either one of these facilities. The facilities have been traditionally viewed as reform schools back in the day. So if a child was a delinquent, got into trouble in the community, send them off to reform school, they would get their education, some level of programming to assist with criminal behavior, and really a lot of structure. But over the years, what we've come to understand is many of the kids who are adjudicated delinquent and placed there have underlying mental health needs. So to serve those mental health needs, at the boys' school, they work with their community mental health and substance abuse center, their behavioral health center, and that behavioral health center provides on-campus services. Again, those services are paid for with Medicaid. So those are billed through Medicaid. Currently, there is 1 mental health therapist from Cloud Peak assigned to the boys' school. Typically, we have 2, but because of staffing issues at the behavioral health center at Cloud Peak, we are down to 1. It's important to remember that children are not placed here for treatment. They are placed here because they committed a delinquent crime. They're determined to be a delinquent. However, we also recognize that these children do have mental health issues, so we do provide services. At the girls' school, recently hired a therapist, an on-staff therapist, and that was because the local providers could no longer provide services to the girls on campus. We worked temporarily with a handful of providers. None of them have the staffing to be able to serve the girls. So we took one of our positions, made it a therapist position, and now provide that service on site. Also at the boys' school and the girls' school are education. DFS pays for education. The boys' school and the girls' school have their own budgets. They have their own fixed costs. Out of that budget, DFS pays for education, teachers at both facilities, and then DFS also pays for room and board. Out-of-state placements, as I mentioned, are usually come through the quarter.
Director, just one moment. I have another question. Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just curious about the boys' school and girls' school. Couple of questions. First of all, what's the average age of the kids that go into that school? And my question is there follow-up after they come out of this school to make sure they're becoming appropriate citizens of our state? Thank you.
Director.
At the boys' school, the average age, Madam Chairwoman, Representative, the average age at the boys' school is 16 years old. And I'm waiting to hear the average age from the girls' school, but it's typically around that same age. Our goal at the boys' school and the girls' school is to provide enough services through different types of programming, whether that's education, a lot of social support, a lot of behavioral type interventions, so that a child can return back to the community and stay in the community. That is the ultimate goal. However, many times these kids at the age of 16 come to us a little bit older, and it is difficult to undo a lot of maybe what's already has been done. But we do our best to provide them what they need so that they can be successful in the community. And the average age, Mr. Chairman, or Madam Chairman and Mr. Representative, is 15 at the girls' school.
Thank you, Director. And Representative Stivar also has, we've got a number of questions piling up. So
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
get your drink of water now, Director. Go ahead, Representative Stivar.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. The question I have is, once these kids finish their treatment at, the PRTF, and they come back to the communities, with experience, these kids get back and they're put into the same placement at the school district that they were when they left. In 2-3 weeks later, 6 months later, they went back to doing the same thing they got them put in them placements. Has that been looked at to take care of at the community level,
Director.
instead of the constant cycle these kids go through?
So just to be clear, so Representative Stivar, you're speaking specifically to the PRTF level child, not the boys and girls school level child? I mean, because those are separate kinds of kids.
Same thing, they go there, they get out, they come back to the school district, and the school district says, okay, you have to move your way out of this placement you were in at the district. They've already been through therapy, and they throw them back in with the same kids that were there that haven't had therapy. And then 6 weeks later, 6 months later, their behaviors are back the way they were, and they're going back into the facility again.
Okay, Director.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Stivar, we talk a lot about recidivism and return placements. That's a conversation that occurs through Medicaid at the PRTF level, and certainly we look at it at the Boys and Girls School and our other placements. And yes, I agree that that is an issue. Some of the solutions around that issue really have come through the behavioral health reform that's occurring, being led by the Department of Health. And there's, I think, various members of your committee that are also participating, in addition to the community behavioral health centers. And one of the focuses of that particular effort is looking at children who are returning from a PRTF placement and prioritizing those children for services in the community. Now, certainly that full reform hasn't taken place, but I think it's a great start to think a little bit differently about the role of the community when children return from some sort of congregate care treatment placement. Again, it's one of the reasons we keep really trying to work through our communities, because ultimately, you're right, Representative Stiefar, kids live in their communities and they live in their homes. And if there isn't something different about their environment, then chances are, yes, that they could return to some level of care. However, we also know that some of these youth have extreme needs. And this also may be the way that we can best provide services. We provide services in the community until they need a higher level of care, they get stabilized, and then hopefully can return home.
Okay, Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question for the director is on this payment for education for kids in the Wyoming Boys School and the Girls School. It says that the DFS pays for education. That's kind of different from all these other places where the Department of Education pays for the education of those people involved. So why is it that that is done by the Department of Family Services in this case? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Director.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Hallinan, that's just been a historical payment model. Many years ago, the boys' school and the girls' school were under the Board of Charities and Reform, which also included, I think, some of the prisons and some of the other institutions. So they were kind of agencies unto themselves. And then I believe in the 90s, they were brought under the purview of their respective agencies. So when the boys' school and the girls' school came to the Department of Family Services, they already had that in their budget, and that's just continued. However, please know that schools are not collecting ADM or the average daily maintenance when a child is placed at the boys' school or girls' school. So we are not paying twice for these services. It's just a different mechanism.
Okay, and I think, let's see, Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, I've got a couple of questions, but first a follow-up on Representative Hallinan's. Corin, in the past, kids that were in placement couldn't get a high school diploma. The best they could do is get the equivalent of a GED or whatever it's called these days. Can kids that are in the boys and the girls school get a high school diploma?
Director.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Connolly, yes. Kids can get a degree, a high school degree, diploma from the boys' school and the girls' school.
Great, thank you. That's a change over the past 10 or 15 years in the right direction, in my view. But my question actually is about a couple of the comments that you made regarding the kids, and that we're talking about children here, just children. And you started by saying virtually all of the children have some underlying trauma way back 20 minutes ago or whatever. But then when we get to the kind of the highest level of state involvement with kids, that kind of, in-home isn't working, foster care isn't working, group homes, and we have a kid who's been adjudicated a delinquent and now under kind of the supervision of the state in what all the kids call juvie, right? They're in juvie, they're in jail, that you began by telling us that it is not designed for treatment. And that deeply concerned me. And then you went on and talked about the kind of limited amount of mental health services that are available. And so I'd like you to talk a little bit more about kind of the mental health services that are available to these kids before they become adults. I mean, we've spent a tremendous amount of time, both here and on the Judiciary Committee, thinking about the provision of mental health services and the need for it. And it seems to me we've identified a population here where right before they become adults, we've taken away or not provided kind of maximum services before they become adults. So could you talk a little bit more about that and the decisions that are made regarding kind of the mental health services for the kids that are in the boys and the girls school?
Director.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Connolly, both the boys' school and the girls' school has already kind of started down this road, but certainly the boys' school, a little bit more recent history, really is taking an approach about understanding more around the trauma of the kids that are coming into their facilities. Again, the placement is because of a delinquency, but with that, we recognize that children have underlying mental health issues. Some of those mental health issues, though, may be personality disorders. So there's certainly an array of the type of mental health service they need. So when a child comes into the boys' school or the girls' school, then they are assessed for their needs, and then they are provided whatever treatment they may need through that particular provider. So the treatment in and of itself is determined by the clinician, not by the agents, not by the facility. I think what's important to note, though, is that that's a mental health service. The environment is also important. And both environments really do provide a supportive way of trying to help the youth, the child, identify the skills that they need to be able to cope, which isn't necessarily a mental health service, right? It helps with mental health, but it is not necessarily a mental health service billable and provided by a clinician. So what I think we need to remember about both the boys' school and the girls' school is that over time, their programming has changed and has tried to adapt to the kids that are now being placed there. Some of them are really pure delinquents. I mean, there are some youth that are there that have committed a series of crimes and have criminal tendencies. They may have some underlying mental health issues, just like you would see in any type of prison facility. So that programming then is really important. The mental health therapy, yes, but the environment to address those behaviors are even more important. The girls' school has always looked at trauma and has always understood and tried to address a lot of the emotional support that the girls need. The boys' school is starting to take on that same type of approach. They've gone through a statewide or a facility-wide training on trauma-informed, trauma-responsive care, and that training will continue over the course of the next year or two. So that's the way that we're trying to support those adolescents in their needs, certainly providing counseling, a clinical service, but also providing an environment that can help them develop the skills and the tools, the coping mechanisms they need once they leave.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, can you talk a little bit about the staffing challenges that you mentioned and what's being done about them?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Connolly, I know there's a lot of conversation through certainly this committee and other committees about mental health services as a whole, the number of clinicians and the mental health shortages that we have. So certainly our facilities are relying on the providers to be able to provide the necessary services. But in the case of the girls' school, that wasn't possible. So we looked at providing those services ourselves. Staffing at the facility level has stabilized. I truly believe that the compensation package that you all passed has really helped with that. We do have some turnover, but in the last 6 months or so, that started to level out. We will always have turnover at our facilities. It's a hard job. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week facility that requires night shifts. Those shifts are really tough to fill.
Senator Hutchings, do I see your hand? The folks online have become very small with the screen share. So are you raising your hand, Senator? No? Okay. Any other questions before we let the director go? Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a question for the director. It says that the services provided to Wyoming Boys School students are not eligible for federal match. I was wondering why that is the case.
Director?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Hallinan, that's a good catch. So while all of the services are billed through Medicaid and Medicaid pays for them, they're paid with 100% state general fund. And the reason is that under Medicaid rules, the boys' school and the girls' school are considered correctional and therefore are not eligible for federal reimbursement.
Okay, well, let's move on. Thank you very much.
Okay, Madam Chairwoman. Okay, out-of-state placements. So as I had mentioned previously, out-of-state placement via the court order placement statutes have to meet certain criteria in order for us to start looking out of state. And more times than not, the reason why children are placed out of state is because the services that they need cannot be found within our state providers. So we work very closely with our providers first to see if any of them could possibly serve the child. And then if not, we look out of state. Typically, the children that are placed out of state are children with significant needs, autism, severe and violent behaviors, combination of intellectual disabilities and mental health needs. These are really our hardest to serve children, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And then in the continuum of services under congregate care available to DFS is detention. And as we know, in detention or jails, limited mental health services are available. And we pay for room and board at a negotiated daily rate with the local detention facility.
Director, do you have any thought kind of off the cuff of how long are children sometimes in detention awaiting? I assume that that's awaiting placement, not the preferential location. So what have you seen?
Let me get that for you. I'm not sure what the average length of stay is in a detention facility. I know it varies. As you said, pending placement. And I do know that we have had children that have had, I think, spent way too much time in detention awaiting a placement. These are often our more violent behavioral kids where local community providers and even some of our youth facilities just do not have the staffing or even the physical plant to take care of some of these kids. But I'm hoping one of my staff is diligently working on that length of stay for us.
Thank you. Go ahead. We'll circle back.
Okay, thank you. So back to the out-of-home placement numbers and costs. Just so you can see, Madam Chairwoman, you kind of asked about this or reflected on this a little earlier. You can see that the number of children placed out of home has decreased in the last 5 years. This is a national trend. This isn't just Wyoming. Nationally, certainly lots of discussions about appropriate placements and reinforcing or enhancing our community services so that children aren't having to be placed out of home. You can see also that our out-of-home placement costs have decreased. Some of that is because of budget reductions, although some of that money has been put back in our current budget due to the budget session in 22. But the trend has been, for the last 10 years, has been a downward trend. This takes those placements and breaks them down so you can see the number of children that are served at various levels of care. By far and away, we serve more children in foster care, which is family homes, relative or stranger. That is the bulk of the children and families that we serve. In group homes, 103. And let me clarify a little bit about the numbers under the children served. These are point in time numbers. At any given point in time, there were 971 children in a family foster care setting in state fiscal year 22. This is a little awkward, but it's an artifact of our system. Our current case management system makes it very, very difficult to count unique children. So we always, until we get our new system, we will be talking about at any given time or a point in time, this is the average number of children in a placement. In group homes, at any given time, 103. In residential treatment or QRTPs, 100. And in detention, 93. So while a lot of our money goes to out-of-home placements in the congregate care level, most of the numbers are with families, and whether that be strangers or relatives, most of the kids we served are in homes. And then this breaks down the data by those doors. So going all the way back to the beginning presentation, there's 3 ways that kids can come into our system. The first was through abuse and neglect. So the program type you see on the left hand of the table, CPS, is a child protective services case, which those are children who have been abused and neglected. So at any given time, you can see where children were placed. And their average age. I think Representative Murphy had been interested in age. This is where you can see age. So these are abused and neglected children. The next one are the delinquents. Those are those youth that have been adjudicated juvenile delinquents. And again, the trends are going down. And then child in need of supervision. This is some data, and I'm going to let Ms. Sheeling speak to this. This is really interesting data, I think, and really speaks to the need for us to be better at serving our children in homes or in their own home. This information is about the outcomes of kids who enter foster care or an out-of-home placement. And really, their outcomes are not great. And I know you'll hear others that will agree. When a child is removed from their home, their chances of being successful in a number of given areas substantially decrease. In other words, the system does not do a good job of raising children. So reinforcing family supports, providing more services for mental health services, substance use disorders to the families when children are either identified with needs or the families identified with needs, as soon as we can, is going to be better for any child that has to go through the system, but the system in and of itself does not have great outcomes. So Lindsay, do you want to walk through these, please?
Ms. Schilling.
Madam Chairman, thank you, Director. So this is a process, it's actually a federally driven data collection effort under the National Youth Transition Database. So it's part of our grant funding requirements. But really what it mandates that we do when the kids that are in foster care are 17, when they age out, and when they turn 19, and when they turn 21, we're required to track down as many of them as we can and administer a survey. And that particular survey is outcome driven and wants to know after they left the system what happened. And they ask a lot of questions about education, employment, connection and relationships with adults, homelessness, food insecurities, substance abuse referrals, experiences with incarceration after they left foster care, and then insurance coverage status, and then how many have gone on to have children themselves by the time they were 21. So this table is just an interesting snapshot of some of those higher priority outcomes that we've been watching. At the top, you'll see we've identified the age of the youth and then the number of youth that were surveyed. We have in our grant requirement, 65% is our target to try and track down 65% of the youth that exited care in any given year. So I think just some of the interesting ones for us, the percent of the kids that reported experiences with substance abuse referrals after they left, 61% at age 17, 33% at age 19, 21%, or yeah, 21% at age 21. So that's a fifth of the kids that leave foster care that go on to continue needing substance use support. The big one that pops out for us, experiences with incarceration. 40% of our 21-year-olds went on to have some sort of interaction with the legal system as an adult. So I'll just leave those here, but it's a public data set. You can look at Wyoming compared to all the other states, compared to national averages. And I believe we've included the link. If not, we'd be happy to provide that. But every year we go and administer surveys on kids as they age out. So we're tracking data. This particular data set is the most current, 2014 to 2018. We're getting ready for publishing the next set of data as well.
So the numbers are very small, so statistically,
Yes.
it's rather hard to tell
Yes.
anything, but do you perceive, just to be maybe positive, are there any areas where you think Wyoming is doing better than the national average?
Madam Chairman, the first one, kids that reported high school degrees or GEDs, almost 3/4 of them, that was significantly above the national average.
And that's about the graduation rate of all students across the state, isn't it?
Mhm.
Somewhere around 78, 80%? I mean, so that's not really much below.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
And then, Madam Chairman, the one related to part-time or full-time employment, 70%. That was a really good outcome for us. If you combine the employment outcomes with substance abuse referrals and experiences with incarceration, the fact that 70% of them were still employed seemed to speak, highly of some of the community-based supports and services that they were receiving.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, is that Senator Hutchings?
No,
Again-
Representative Slitner.
Oh, sorry. The boxes on the screen are so small with this data sharing, it's kind of hard to see it all. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just the report, the percentage reporting having children, Ms. Schilling, I'm curious about that. And is there any follow-up with them after they've had children, and any data on their children and how they do it in society? Thank you.
Ms. Schilling.
Madam Chairman, I'm not aware of a data set that kind of tracks multiple generations. Anecdotally, I think that outcome is fairly in line with what we see with generational poverty issues and neglect and how it cycles in families. So,
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
So thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Lindsay. So the identified problems, and I am going to ask Ms. Schilling to interject in this conversation as well. This has been a large part of the work that she's been doing with her division. What we know is that we have a small group of children, usually 12 to 15 per year, so 12 to 15 at any given time with extremely high needs. They're 12 to 17. They're typically intellectually disabled or developmentally disabled, neurodevelopmental issues, and mental health diagnoses. So a lot of co-occurring. Most of these children are aggressive and violent, and they pose significant behavioral challenges. And as you can tell by the age, a lot of these children, youth, adolescents, especially the boys, are big. So you have older kids with a lot of mental health and IDDD needs who are very difficult to serve. We really struggle with this group of children. There's a lack of local and facility-based mental health services resulting in appropriate placements. Madam Chairwoman, this goes back to your question about detention. And the average length of stay in the detention facility is 40 days. Oftentimes, and I should say often, there are times where we have to place children in detention
Director,
facilities. Yes.
I'm sorry, I have a question here from Senator Furphy. Go ahead, Senator.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have there been any studies performed, this age group 12 to 17 years old? I know when our sons were growing up, there was a big usage of drugs, particularly marijuana, and that led to a lot of developmental problems in those kids long-term that I've seen. Are there any studies in that area that's leading these kids obviously down the wrong path? Thank you.
Director, go ahead.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Furphy, that's a good question. I am not familiar with any studies that tie the problems of these children to usage early on. I think you're asking about their usage, not necessarily that of the parents. Most of the kids that we treat in this group, this 12 to 15, have low substance abuse issues. They really are mental health and developmentally disabled. What I don't know is about maternal use of substances or substances in the home.
I'll just say that I believe, and Senator Baldwin may know, I have certainly seen research showing significant mental health use, severe mental health problems in youth who are using marijuana, even, which we tend to think of as being on the lower end, but that's not necessarily these children, but there is other research, but okay. While we're paused there briefly, any questions just to?
Madam Chair.
Representative Flitner, I think your hand is up. I'm actually succeeding and seeing the hand now. Very good. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I'm just curious, Director, if this is a contemporary issue or if this has always been the case, this aggressive and violent behavior. Is this something that's new to society, or how old is this trend? Thank you.
Director.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Flitner, we've always had these difficult children. This is not something new. What is different, however, is the ability to serve them. So as we talked about the decline of numbers requiring placements, then what we also see is out of home placement options also being limited. So what we have done, I think, and we being the collective we, society has done a better job of trying to help adolescents and children that have some sort of need, whether it's an early identification of mental health, maybe it's special ed or something. I do think we've done a better job of serving a lot of those kids. However, what's left are the really tough ones. And because we don't place as many children anymore, we don't have as number of beds that we would used to have, the number of staffing. And so when we get these types of kids, it's really hard to find a place. These are the kids that go out of state typically. Our providers, I think, have done a marvelous job in trying to be creative. But as we all know, this is Wyoming, we have limitations. And sometimes these kids have such specific needs, specifically around autism, for example. That is such a specialized level of care that it would be very difficult for Wyoming to develop a treatment program to serve children at this need, because there just aren't a lot of them. 12 to 15 at any given time is just not a lot of kids, but they're very expensive and they're very difficult to serve.
Senator Hutchings, did you have your hand up?
I did, Madam Chair, but I think Corin went ahead and answered the question. Thank you.
Okay. So, Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. With these kids that are going to out-of-state placements, is anybody tracking when they come back? Because, let's say they're in Utah, down in Texas, at one of the facilities, and then they come back, they're on a med regimen. And as soon as they get back, the doctors here change their meds because they don't like the meds they come back on. Has anybody been tracking that as a problem?
Director.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Stiver, I would defer to the Department of Health and Medicaid on that question. because these children are usually Medicaid eligible and served medically through that system. I don't know how much they track. We certainly don't track that. We defer to the medical professionals to
Right.
make those decisions.
Follow up? Did you have follow up, Represent? No? No? Okay. Okay, let's go ahead. Thank you, Director. Go ahead.
Okay, Madam Chairwoman, and the last bullet on page 22 or slide 22 that make it very difficult for us to be nimble are, of course, complex regulations and funding criteria. As you all are very well aware, Medicaid has strict criteria for who and how they serve, what services they provide. The Department of Family Services also has a similar funding stream called 4E that also has eligibility criteria. So if a child isn't eligible for that, it's a lot of general fund. And then, of course, this federal special education funding. So the difficulty comes in trying to identify what funding the child is eligible for, what hoops we have to jump through in order to meet the criteria for that funding, and then providing the services. In other words, we do our best to try to find a placement and get the child placed, but we do a lot of background work trying to figure out how it's going to be paid for.
So along those lines, and I appreciate what I'm going to ask is actually a Medicaid question, so I get that. But two things. One is these children who have had to have out-of-state placement because of their significant needs, do you know, would they typically end up being able to be Medicaid eligible as an adult because of developmental disability in that category? That's the first question. And then the second one is, I'm thinking that there's a category of Medicaid coverage for children aging out of foster care into adulthood, but I'm not sure if I'm right. Those two, if you would.
Madam Chairwoman, if I could answer the second one first. Yes, if a child ages out of foster care, they are eligible for Medicaid for a certain number of years, and Lindsay may know the specific number of years.
Madam Chairman, until they're 26, I believe.
And then, Madam Chairwoman, in regard to the first question, how many of the adolescents that age out of our placement, our system, and how many of those continue to be Medicaid eligible? I don't know that, and I'm hoping maybe the Department of Health might be able to speak to that because they have the longitudinal data of the eligibility of that child throughout.
Maybe they'll send you a text while we're doing the next page. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So what are we doing to try to solve these problems? First, again, one more time, why home matters, really thinking deliberately about services that could be provided locally. Children do better when they're closer to family, when family can see them, or when they're with families. We're looking at developing concrete connections to resources. From a DFS side, we're doing a lot of safety planning and coordination with the family. We're working with them to identify what is their emergency plan, what is their contingency plan, so that if there is an escalation or if there are some problems, that they know what they're going to do. And then, of course, resource development where possible, thinking about how we use our money a little bit differently to provide those resources. And please understand, I'm not a Pollyanna. I recognize the difficulty of developing local resources. I do. But I also think that if we let our foot off of this gas, then we're going to go back to a situation where we're placing a lot of kids. So continuing our focus on community, on family support, there's a lot of things that we can do to help those families so that we can prevent hopefully an escalation, or if there's an escalation, it doesn't go into crisis and placement. The community juvenile service boards are a big part of it, especially around those adolescents who have committed crimes. Community juvenile service boards are boards that can exist in every community. The statute allows for it, but the department has funding, and I believe we fund about 14 of them to really provide services to those delinquents that are identified early on through some sort of citation. So at any given level, at the municipal court level, the juvenile court level, even the district court level, a group of people who are developing local services so that those youth can be served locally, maybe even a diversion. Some of the boards act as diversion programs so that a kid isn't cited or doesn't have a record, but that they're getting some community-based services so that it doesn't escalate into more criminal or mental health needs. I've talked about the behavioral health reform. Again, that's being led by the Department of Health, but I do see that as such a critical part of our agency's work, especially when it comes to identifying families who come under court order. The PRTF rate rebasing, again, these services are expensive. They're just expensive. And so continuing to look for creative ways to provide them with the resources that they need to provide us the services is important. The high needs adolescent policy work group pilot. This has been an ongoing conversation with the director of the Department of Health, looking for a potential location where we could do a pilot to serve some of these intensively high need kids, those 12 to 15 that we mentioned. We see this as a potential for a short-term option. So for example, if we need a short-term placement prior to a more appropriate placement out of state or even within one of our local providers, or as maybe a de-escalation. Sometimes we have kids in PRTFs that really start to escalate and need just a little bit of a change of venue for a minute so that we can de-escalate and then they can return. This is still under talks, but as some of you know, I've been with both agencies for a long time, and this is really the first time where we've talked seriously about developing some concrete services. But as with everyone else, the Department of Health has an incredibly difficult time hiring staff, especially at the facilities. And we recognize this, so we're taking this one a little bit slow. And then the Interagency Children's Collaborative, and I'm going to invite Lindsay to speak to this particular initiative because this has been a lion's share of her work. And I just want to say she's done a marvelous job in this area. So Lindsay, could you please give some explanation about the ICC?
Ms. Schilling.
Madam Chairman, thank you, Director. So the Interagency Children's Collaborative is sort of founded in a statutory infrastructure, but requires collaboration between the Department of Education, the Department of Health, the Department of Family Services, the Governor's Office, and Workforce Services. So what we've done is sort of used that foundation and built on it to create we call it kind of a task force. It's a crisis stabilization and placement task force. And each of the agencies has committed resources and staff hours to ad hoc calls multiple times a week. We're leveraging the Medicaid prior authorization vendors to help us with some clinical expertise. But really what we've done is been able to come together both from locating services, clinical evaluations, but also from a funding perspective to come up with creative ways of making access to services an option and an opportunity for a lot of these youth. So while we're still handling those cases one at a time, there hasn't been kind of a wholesale solution identified. Our success at being able to get kids to places where they can receive services has been a massive improvement over the last 2 years. So I would, commend the work from the Department of Health and the resources they committed in the Behavioral Health Division and Medicaid and our clinical unit. It's been really nice to have some wins as of late. So we'll continue to build that out. And the intention then is to use the data we're collecting through this individual case management process to then move up to the agency director level and the governor's office level in the form of recommendations on what we need to be doing differently as a system to try and provide better services to these kids and families.
Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. What I'm wondering is there a differentiation when these children get into trouble? The ones that may be alcohol and drug related, maybe it was an instance. Is there any data on that? Or, behavioral problems, sometimes is it addiction? Or how is that? I mean, how are they looked at?
Ms. Schilling.
Madam Chairman, Representative Ottman, I think when a youth comes to the attention of the Department of Family Services, we work with our community-based providers to have everybody assessed by a clinician to look for substance use disorders, mental health issues. And I think we take that as part of our case planning to identify those needs and to be sure that we can find those services and supports, not only for the youth, but also for the family. And I think that's a really exciting part about the behavioral health reform is the focus now on the family, not just the youth themselves. If we can get parents treatment more expeditiously, the time that a youth might have to be in foster care might decrease, and that would be a good thing.
Follow up? Mhm.
Okay, so if you have a young person, say 15 years old, that what is severely violent or has been shown to be violent on occasion, if they have drug and alcohol problems themselves, not particularly in their family, what services can be, because I don't know of a place. So anyway, what?
Ms. Schilling.
Madam Chairman, Representative Ottman, I think a lot of our youth services providers incorporate substance use treatment kind of in their milieu. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but we do have substance use services available.
One more, please. Madam Chairman, where would a person, if they had these problems, where would they be placed? I mean, foster care, into a facility, into?
Ms. Schilling.
Madam Chairman, Representative Ottman, I think that would be based on a clinical recommendation of sort of level of care. Our preference would be that they be in a foster home and receive outpatient services through local providers. But if it's an acute enough situation where residential setting were recommended in order to keep the child safe, then our teams would look that direction for an appropriate program in a residential treatment center or psychiatric facility.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, just to close out the conversation, there are some options, just long-term, certainly not fixing the problems of today, but looking ahead of some of the potential policy interventions or opportunities available to us. One, and there's a lot more coming out about the value of licensed clinicians or counselors in the elementary, middle, and high school environments, especially in the elementary. Sometimes some schools have social workers, some schools hire counselors, but really having somebody with a mental health expertise available to support those children and to identify those children and to help the families is something that is becoming really an important component of early intervention. Again, focusing on family needs, especially parents of young children with special needs. That 12 to 15 at any given time are children that have had, a lot of them have had developmental disabilities since birth. And the children get older, they get larger, and their problems become more significant. Helping families early on to recognize that, helping build supports around that in a voluntary basis, I think is important so that children don't have to come into the custody of the state to get their needs met. Continue telehealth expansion. At the Wyoming Girls School, we use telehealth quite, not extensively, But the superintendent has been working with community mental health centers, community providers, to provide telehealth services to support the clinician that's on staff. What's really cool about this is that they're able to connect with the behavioral health center providers from the community, the home community of the girl, so that when discharge occurs, when the child can go home, there has been some continued relationship with their local behavioral health center. Also use it for medication management, and psychiatric care. Certainly statewide recruitment and retention efforts focused on mental health practitioners. This is always a topic of conversation, I know, for this community and then, or committee, and then the adult mental health waiver through Medicaid. So with that, Madam Chairwoman, that's the end of our presentation. And certainly if there are more questions, we're happy to answer them.
Okay, Representative Stiver.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. How do I want to put this? What about is, I don't want to put this. The ones that are flying under the radar that have their own insurance that are looking for help, are they able to get the help? Parent training, like years ago, there was Uplift, Pick and Pen. There was conferences that parents could go in and collaborate together. That's all kind of went away. Are you guys looking at bringing anything like that back?
Director.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Stiver, you know, in the past, that's not been within the purview of the Department of Family Services. Really, the department has looked at itself as that entity that responds to those legal interactions, those court involvements. Over the last couple of years, though, we've started to expand how we look at children and families from a very early intervention. Certainly, we support those efforts wherever we can, whether that's financially or through referrals. But in terms of actually developing some statewide family services for mental health, we have not gotten to that point. However, I know the Department of Health and also the Department of Education do provide funding for those types of services, or have in the past, to really support families. I think it's a worthwhile discussion, and certainly one that we've engaged in through various conversations at the director level. But enhancing those family supports, I think, is essential. In terms of concrete activities, I would have to defer to the Department of Health as to what specifically they may be doing.
Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Director, the Wyoming Home Matters, are we seeing any progress in these folks? Are they doing better after this focus of our DFS? Or, you know, versus the ones that didn't stay at home or didn't do well at home? Are we seeing a difference in the outcome of these folks in the future? Thank you.
Director.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Hallinan, this has just been a focus in the last 3 years or so. So there hasn't been enough time to really look at what kind of outcomes we've had. And quite honestly, COVID has been such a big part of our world that we haven't infused a lot of resources into it yet. We're developing that out now. Right now, it's just a way for us to be able to talk about reframing the way we engage with families. It's not a set of tasks, so to speak. It really is helping us to work with our partners to ask the question, what can we do to keep this child safe at home? And this just isn't for children. This is vulnerable adults as well. Vulnerable adults want to stay in their homes. What can we do? How do we create services? How do we provide case management so that they can be successful with that and be safe? So short answer is no, we haven't tracked any outcomes yet. It's a framework, it's a philosophical approach, but we will be looking at the data as we move through it to see if it does have any type of impact.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Director and Ms. Schilling. Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd just like to mention that, Corin, you didn't mention that while there are some challenges for the department to be nimble, you did do something very significant in the past couple of years, which is close a kind of unit of the boys' school, if I remember correctly. And that allows for the reallocation of resources more to families. That was my understanding, and kind of this new initiative to keep kids in the home. And so I'd just like to kind of thank you for, in some, if that is true, that is an example of kind of understanding that honestly institutionalizing kids doesn't work in the long run. At least that's what the national data tells us, and that the agency has attempted to do something very differently, and that is something good, and that this interagency working group is another way to kind of look at what's available to children in their home communities, and whether it's, hooking up with the Department of Workforce Services for some youth training when a kid comes out of foster care, for example. I mean, those are good and necessary steps that we haven't done in the past. So it really is more of a comment and a congratulations for being a bit more nimble than I think that you said that you were.
Director,
Okay.
do you have any response to that, or was it a pure happenstance of a budgetary cut? Perhaps
Madam Chair.
you would like to claim advanced forethought and wisdom in any case.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Connolly, thank you for those kind words. But yes, the closure was as a result of budget reductions. However, there also census has decreased at both facilities. And so it was an opportunity at the same to also right size, to recognize that that all of the available dorms, and this happened at both the boys' school and the girls' school, that the number of children that they've served has decreased over the past 10 years. And even though we made the reduction for budget cuts, it was a conversation that was going to be inevitable anyway. But I do appreciate the comments about the partnerships with our agencies. And some of you may know that I came from the Department of Health and had a lot of public health experience. And really the public health approach to primary, secondary, tertiary prevention applies very much to what we do. If we can help get some primary services into place to prevent abuse and neglect, to prevent the delinquency behaviors, to prevent those needs, then the work that we do can be more focused on those children with extreme needs, those children who have suffered physical abuse and suffered severe neglect. That's where we should be doing our work, but in order to focus on that work, we have to support the communities and our sister agencies in the work that they're doing.
Yes, Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, because I think this is so valuable, our appropriations process for your agencies honestly doesn't recognize that kind of interagency task force working together, because for each one of you, it's a relatively low cost. It's easy for it to be crossed out in a budgeting process. And I'm just going to encourage you and all of the agencies to talk about in your budget hearings the absolute necessity to continue that kind of interagency cooperation and the costs that are associated with it. Because in all honesty, I think that the return on investment for those costs is so much greater than honestly the relatively small amount that's allocated to each of your at least 4 agencies in there. And that's an important element. And again, our budgeting process doesn't recognize that cooperation and the costs associated with it well enough. So just an encouragement. Thank you.
Okay, committee, we have some more discussion along these lines, but we're going to take a break before that. But before we take the break, I just want to throw in a few words as we go forward thinking about this. and this is from my perspective, after 10 years in the legislature and 8 in Labor Committee, is I think we have seen, or I have seen, a real challenge legislatively in looking at these types of issues, because on one hand, we have recognized the need to, track outcomes. What happens to the children after they age out of a certain kind of care? How do we recognize the links between children in school and children's medical care and other home placements? And at the same time, I've also heard a lot of legislative pushback on any kind of state involvement in preschool children, in case management with families, in involvement with attempting to provide services to families. And sometimes there's a real push to make sure that the state doesn't get involved with families and their situations. And so I think that as we go forward, we just need to realize, whatever our own thoughts about where the balance should be, that in the legislature, at least, there is a lot of wrestling with these issues and how they play out in terms of the role of the parents, the role of the families, the role of the state, the services that we look at our family members maybe, or our neighbors or community members and say, these people need help. It's a wrestle. And so I just wanted to throw that in there from all of my years. Have that being said, let's take a break and come back at, now that we've pontificated a little bit more, 10:20. Okay, we're on recess till 10:20. Donna, are we ready to go? Okay. Are we launched? All right, thank you. So committee, here we are back again. Next up is the Guardian Ad Litem. Sir, come on up and tell us what we need to know. And you might give a little background again, because I don't, there might be a few people on this committee who have served on judiciary, but most of us not probably. And so make sure that we're all up to speed before you launch too far down the path. Thank you.
Madam Chair Wilson, Chairman Baldwin, Committee, thank you for having me here this morning. My name is Joe Belcher. I'm the Director of the Wyoming Office of Guardian Ad Litem. For those that may not know, the Wyoming Office of Guardian Ad Litem represents children across the state of Wyoming in 22 of our 23 counties that are involved in abuse and neglect cases, children in need of supervision cases, and delinquency cases. We also are involved in termination of parental rights and appeals from juvenile cases or termination of parental right cases to the Wyoming State Supreme Court. As far as our involvement in abuse and neglect cases, we are automatically appointed by statute when a child becomes involved. When a petition is filed by the district or county attorney that there's abuse and neglect allegation against the parents. As far as CHINs and delinquencies, we're appointed a little bit differently. If the child's interest and the parent's interest or guardian's interest are adverse to each other, then we'll be appointed to act as a guardian ad litem for that child in his best interest only. That child will have a public defender appointed to him or her automatically by statute, and the same as in a delinquency. Different counties handle that differently. Sometimes on CHINs, we're automatically appointed by the judge, same with delinquencies. It just depends on kind of how they view those two particular situations. But throughout the state, we have roughly 30 attorney guardian ad litems that work for the office. Most of those are contract guardian ad litems. And we have 6 state guardian ad litems that are state employees. So sometimes in our more rural areas, such as in the west, northwest, we find we have more contract attorneys covering more counties. And obviously in our larger areas, such as here in Casper, Cheyenne, Sweetwater County, and Campbell County, we have a larger collection of guardian ad litems to represent that area. That's just naturally our higher volume districts. So today, one of the things that we've been talking about is mental health treatment and court-ordered placements for those children. And so Director Schmidt did a great job of kind of explaining how that comes to be. And I can kind of extrapolate on that. I don't want to bore you to death or talk over the top of what she's already mentioned, but how that really comes to be. And we see in more kind of these cases that I think we're talking about today, more in our child in need of supervision cases. Those are those ones that are, again, a child has not committed a crime or a delinquency per se, but more of a status offense or problem in the home. So they're not minding their parent or not going to school, or such as elopement, running away. You don't see much of the old time as smoking cigarettes outside the gym, but kind of more of those other issues. And so we view those more as a blend between mental health on the child and some sort of, if you start peeling back the onion, more of a trauma or issue within the family. And so those tend to be cases that are open the longest, are the most expensive. And I think Chairwoman Wilson, I think you asked about the number of CHINs, why they're the lowest. When they're talking to Director Schmidt, but I think my experience on why that is simply cost. Some counties just will not file a CHINS action because, again, it's kind of a dual thing. You're looking at mental health for the child, family issues that need to be resolved before that child can either safely return to the home or stay in the home. And so, so those are some of the reasons why CHINs are lower. That group that Director Schmidt identified that we're working on, those 12 to 15 kids that are hanging out there with long-term placements and cost, those are generally our child in need and supervision children. They just, as we say, we see them last longer, multiple placements for various reasons, multiple mental health issues, along with your behavioral issues. And so they're very difficult cases. One thing when yesterday, I kind of looked at our roster of clients per se and did a quick review of those that are court ordered in placement at this point in time. And this is not 100% accurate, but we have 4 currently placed here at WBI. So that's our PRTF, St. Joe's WBI. We have 8 in a RTC or QRTP. Again, that's such as Cathedral Home, Meadowlark, Red Top Meadows, Yes House, Boys and Girls School, Cottage. 2 are currently out of state in treatment. 5 are waiting for a PRTF. And that can be for various reasons, waiting for a bed date, waiting for a correct placement to match up with the child's diagnosis, or it could be that we're just searching for someone that would take our Wyoming Medicaid rate. We have another 7 that are in PRTF. So again, your St. Joe's on that one. One of the committee members asked about this detention pending placement. Currently, we have 3, what I recognize as 3 kids that are in juvenile detention waiting placement into a PRTF. Again, it could be for waiting for a bed date or waiting for appropriate PRTF to match up with that child's diagnosis. And these are the kids that you find are been in multiple placements, are more aggressive than other children that we see, or have some sort of combination of aggressive behaviors and intellectual disability that makes it hard for that child to be placed in a facility. We have 5 at the Boys and Girls School.
Excuse me, Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me ask about some of these violent kids. At what point do you refer them to the state hospital in Evanston? Or do you ever have to do that? Thank you.
Ed?
Madam Chair, Senator Furphy, really, WBI is our state hospital for our juveniles. So that's the first gateway. If they deem that child to be severe, that needs to go to the state hospital for more battery of tests, and that's how that would work. But generally, we would not send a juvenile to the state hospital in Evanston.
Go ahead. Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I might have asked this question to Director Schmidt before, but it's my understanding that Wyoming is still not compliant with the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, and meaning that we allow kids in detention that in other states would not be allowed. And because of that, we don't get lots of federal funding that we would otherwise be eligible for. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Mr. Belcher.
Madam Chairman, Representative Connolly, I don't know the numbers that Director Schmidt would, but I do know that we do place children in detention for various reasons in the state of Wyoming. One, some children have to go to detention. That's where they're, they commit a crime. They can't safely be in the home of the community. And so there's, unfortunately, detention is some of what those children need or some want. But we do, as I mentioned, place children in detention certainly as a holding cell. They've got no other place to go. We cannot place them in a foster care setting, cannot place them in crisis because they've maybe been there, have been destructive there or disruptive or have run away from a crisis center, same with a group home. And so generally those kids we see sitting in detention that should be in mental health are those kids that have been through the system a few times.
Follow-up.
And by detention, we mean jail. They are in county jails.
Correct.
And again, following up on Senator Furphy, how long are we keeping kids in county jails?
Too long. I don't know, Madam Chairman, Representative Connolly, I don't know the number. 40 sounds about right. What Director Schmidt brought 40 days sounds correct. Certainly, this is something that our Office of Guardian Ad Litem fights quite a bit against, is getting kids out of detention into some place where they should be, because child has mental health issues. The jail's not equipped for that, to handle that situation, to handle that child. I'll give you an example. I have a kiddo that I've kept on my caseload from the time I became a guardian ad litem many years ago. I got him when he was 7. He is 16 now. His placement was at the boys' school, and it was a placement out of sheer necessity. He wasn't a match for the boys' school. The boys' school wasn't a match for him, but we had run out of placements for him. And he, as we knew, he would run his course at the boys' school. And now he's sitting in detention since May. It's August, and we're trying to find a placement for him.
Follow-up.
This is completely a hypothetical. What if we said to you, we want this to stop tomorrow, right? We do not want kids in detention. And let's say we'll give you 2 days, right? Kids can stay in detention 2 days until we move them someplace, right? What would it take?
Mr. Belcher.
Go ahead. You get to
Sure.
imagine
There's
this for
evidently
us.
a legislative ferry floating about. Catch her quick.
Madam Chair, Representative Connolly, obviously money, so that we can find or construct some place where those kids can go, where they can be safe, receive the treatment that they need, and so that we can work with the parent or identify a potential guardian relative that will take them into the home and work with them consistently, so that when that child does return to that home, that it's not, we all know there's a honeymoon period for whatever, 4 weeks, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 days, and then issues arise that we want to make sure that we can have services that will keep that family unit intact and that child not to blow out and not to have to go to court again where he's been or she's been picked up for running down to the corner and trying to burn off some frustration, and the police officer picks the kid up, puts them into protective custody, and then we start that cycle all over again. So it's money, it's therapy, it's finding the people willing to do it, it's finding the facility to construct that would be a great start.
I was talking to one of our directors yesterday about a case that has been made known to me. And it seems to me that the director said, and I'm just kind of shooting from the hip because I don't remember exactly, that the director the director himself has made, I think he said he's had 150 rejections for this child. So we don't need just money. I think we need a miracle, which to my mind doesn't come from money. But anyway, Senator Hutchings, were you raising
Madam
your
Chair,
hand?
can I ask a
Oh,
follow-up?
follow-up,
Or
okay.
just a follow-up?
go ahead.
Because I'm going to go with the kind of alternative to the miracle. Although I take a miracle too. And Mr. Belzer, I don't remember, is the GAL its own agency at this point, or are you still under the PD?
Madam Chair, Representative Conley, we are our own agency since
Okay.
since 2020.
Okay, thank you. Then that means that you go before the Appropriations Committee. I want you to imagine the ferry as the Appropriations Committee, and I want you to, I'm going to encourage you, let me put it that way. I want to encourage you to bring forth this reality to the Appropriations Committee and figure out that dollar figure. Because let's face it, keeping kids in jail, our county jails, for up to 40 days is not acceptable. We should all say that that's just not acceptable. So we want you to solve it. And I want the appropriations ferry, barring the miracle, to be able to recognize what it would cost us. Even though I understand that there are some kids that are really problematic, but.
Well, and Madam Chair and Representative Conley, I will certainly be more than happy to do that. And just to give the committee an understanding of what we're talking about financially for this sort of sect of children. This child that I was just mentioning, he's currently costing the state almost $500,000. And we've seen children in placement and in state custody for longer than he's been in, for shorter, and just depends on their placement levels and needs that run over $500,000 to 100,000 or 200,000 or whatever the kids need. So if you want to, instead of paying Utah or Texas or Georgia or whatever, $300,000, we can keep that money in state and serve our kids better.
Stop being the ferry.
Go ahead, Mr. Belcher.
And just to round out, BOCES was mentioned. We do have kids placed court order at BOCES that can't be in the school district, in their local school district, because of behavioral reasons. And so we do see that. And so it's difficult work. It's hard to get these kids in the right placements. We work hand in hand with Department of Family Services caseworkers to try to do what's in these children's best interest and these parents' best interest. And for most of the time, I would say majority of the time, we do. We have good results, we have good outcomes, we have good people working in these fields that are here to work with children and family in need and in crisis. And so I will say we're very lucky as a state for that.
Senator McCune.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Could you walk me through the funding model of how BOCES actually gets money? I think it's kind of scary at best and might be problematic also. It may not just be we don't have enough money. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Belcher.
Madam Chair, Senator McEwen, I don't know. That's out of my world there. I don't know how BOCES, I don't know. I hate to speculate. I just know that when we place a child there, we remove them from their local school district, that local school district will pay that educational piece, sort of that as Ms. Director Schmidt talked about. But how they exist financially, I don't know. I don't know how that comes about.
Uh, Well, let's hear from the answer in the audience, and then you can have your follow-up. Yes, sir. If you'll just come on up and introduce yourself for the committee, if you would.
Help him out.
It's good, we have lifelines out there.
Yeah.
The Bosse's Ferry, there's a lot of them. Very good.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, just there's a kind of a dark spot in the middle that'll make it go green. There you
There
go.
we go. Madam Chair, my name is Dan Mayer. I'm the Executive Director for Region 5 BOCES located in Wilson, Wyoming. We operate CBRV Ranch, one of the 3 BOCES that serve some of the students that are being discussed. Our funding structure, we are primarily a fee-for-service agency. We are allowed through state statute to levy taxes up to $500,000 from each participating member district. There are 3 residential BOCES, and there are BOCES that are higher ed. They partner with higher ed and school districts. And so our primary source of revenue is fees. So we charge fees for the placements that we have. We do generate some revenue from mill funds. We do have districts that participate. Those are typically restricted funds, so we do not use them for salary. They are to be used for, and I don't know if this is inaccurate, but what I call like capital construction and those maintenance type of things, transportation and technology. And that's really the makeup. We get a little bit of federal dollars, the National School Lunch Program, to offer that program, but really no other state resources from the Department of Ed. We just charge them like we would charge districts that are there. And
Do you have a follow-up on that, Senator?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. In your opinion, and this is going to be a tricky question, I spent about 5 hours in the Gillette BOCES
yes,
location with the director and a bunch of those people.
yes.
At the end of the day, do you think we're allocating mill levies fairly? At the end of the day, do you think we could be doing stuff better to fund them? And I'm going to point out our K through 12 system is doing quite well.
Yes.
Without getting into some opinions on that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, the short answer is I think we could do things differently to better fund those entities. We are actually going to present at the Joint Education Committee meeting as BOCES as an LEA to be able to get some more federal dollars, not really going after dollars that come to the district, but we're seeing these high needs students, and I think we're all, to me, it's a resource problem. I think a lot of these students we would like to serve, even though they're difficult. And sometimes we're not successful and they exit very loudly from our programs at times. And that gains attention, but I'm glad to hear we're focusing on that. There are some positive outcomes. The needs have gotten greater. It's really human capital that we lack. We've run some estimates of dollar amounts to provide that level of care when we're serving some of these students, and we're not a lockdown facility, we're a treatment facility, and we run into some difficulties. We run out of options, and we've in our high needs work group that I've participated in with DFS, we've talked about the need of like a stabilization unit or something that we can access as providers when students are in crisis. So we are able to retain those students, but sometimes when we're unable to be successful when that is happening, it's hard to return that student to that when there might have been some damage to staff or harm in repairing some of those things. And we can see those things happening. So I think there are, in looking in other states, you see that it's not on one school district, one department. You're seeing that there's more generalized funds, because some of the issues that we've identified is that these kids aren't identified when they come into the system. So to know the the resources to allocate them. And so I'm glad we're discussing it. I think there's some amazing service providers. I think reallocating resources into the state to be able to support these entities, to serve these students is something to consider.
Follow?
I'm going to put you on the spot again. I'm sorry, but I appreciate what you're saying. And I'm going to ask if you agree with a statement I'm going to make. Sometimes I tend to get frustrated with, we need more money, we need more money, we need more federal funds. But sometimes we as a collective whole don't always look at creative answers of how to move things around. For example, we all run households, private households. And if we can't afford a Ferrari, we gotta drive a Dodge, and it's probably 10 years old. But we still figure out a way to have some form of transportation, or we figure out a way to feed ourselves and feed children. And sometimes the federal money has some strings attached to it. But in the interim, shouldn't we be solving the problem with what we have right now before we receive more funding, if it's possible? Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Mr. Mayor, thoughts?
I would agree that I think before we start, is it a reallocation of where certain funds are? With this population of students, where have they been in the system? What services are they? Do we put those services together and think of this comprehensive plan? I think oftentimes we may not always know all the different resources that they're involved in. And again, I think it would be an interesting dialogue to like take out all the rules and figure out where this money could come from, and then figure out the rules later. A lot of these students, when we've identified, I was part of this, a lot of them have IEPs, so there's funding through education that could be looked into. Very generous state and special ed, it's 100% reimbursed. So we should be able to provide some of those costs. DFS, Department of Health through Medicaid, how do we look at all those funding streams? And Nick, sometimes it's who's gonna pay for what based upon the diagnostic, rather than here's the pocket of money, let's focus on the service and the needs and getting those services. However, I do believe that there are money out there that maybe haven't been sought after. Maybe I'm wrong, I look at different grants that could be brought in as additional resources for professional development, more training around trauma and trauma-informed practices at the school level in the communities and things like that. So I think it's changed, and I don't know how much the system has changed along with our changing needs and all hands on deck situation. And I think that would be wise to look into that. And I think there are some things that could be done a little different that may help immediately.
Okay. Another follow-up?
It's more of a statement. And I do want to tell you that the afternoon I spent there, I was quite impressed with the staff and what they're doing. So I think it's important that we figure out how to make it work with or without extra dollars. And I think we do have some room in existing budgets to move money over there if need be, while y'all are working on grants and that kind of thing. But I did want to tell you, I was impressed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Mayor while he's wandered by? Thank you very much, and thank you for your work with the kids. Okay, Mr. Belcher, back to you. I kind of forget where we were at, but I'm sure you had something more you wanted to tell us.
Madam Chair, I'm just really open to any questions or anything, how we maybe move through the system with these kids. It's not done willy-nilly to put a child into placement or put a child in detention while waiting placement. I want the committee to know that MDT that Director Schmidt talked about is a very important piece in the juvenile life of a juvenile case, and that's, anyone involved in the child's life is really on that team. Obviously the parent or the guardian, the school, parent's attorney if they have one, the county or district attorney, guardian ad litem, therapist, counselor, foster parents. And so there is a list of people to be appointed by statute, as mentioned. It's funny, one of those is not the child, even though the MDT is for the child. But we bring the child to the MDT if it's appropriate, if the child wants to participate. Obviously, that depends on age and whether he wants to stay in school or play baseball or whatever activity might be going on during the MDT. But and so when we're looking at a placement, again, there's protocol that has to take place. And so we have to refer that child to a psychiatrist for an evaluation on his level of care. And so that can either be through a local psychiatrist, or we use our state hospital is Seattle Children's Hospital. And so we'll do an evaluation through them, and then they'll give us their recommendation for placement for the child. Obviously, we want to start out least restrictive, which is in the community, and most of our children stay in the community and receive therapy through local services. Some require maybe an out of home, so a foster care placement, but stay in the community. And then when we talk about our higher levels of care, we go obviously in front of, discuss it with the MDT and take our recommendation to the court. And so the judge is actually the decision maker on placement for that child. So oftentimes, or not oftentimes, sometimes the parents may not want the child to go to placement, and so they can plead their case with their attorney to the judge, and we'll certainly give our recommendations to the judge, and he'll make the decision on whether what level of care for that child to be placed at. And so nothing is done just sort of throw it in the air and just see what happens. There's a lot of consideration, a lot of consternation. I mean, trauma for removal of a child is real. And so not only you're talking sometimes removal from a home, then you're talking removal from their friends, their school, their favorite bus driver, their coach, and now you're placing them in a facility out of community, be it in another town in Wyoming or in another surrounding state, or sometimes we even have to go to really far-reaching states such as Tennessee and Georgia. And so that's a heavy load as a team to take on, and it's a heavy load for a child that's already in crisis and already in trauma to deal with. And so there was a question, I think, by Representative Stivar earlier to Director Schmidt about those children coming back into the community, back in the school, and what that looks like. And I can tell you, those are very, very thought out questions. And so what happens is that when a child is in treatment, they have treatment reviews done usually monthly, and the child, the parent, the caseworker, the guardian ad litem are on the treatment review, along with the therapist at the facility, discussing how things are going, what are they working on, what part of the milieu they're in, have they gotten to family therapy yet, is it working, is it not working? And so when those child is running through the program and is looking at a discharge, we'll get a discharge date. And so we'll have meetings with the school, and we'll sit down, and most of them are on IEP, so we'll sit down with the director of special ed and the principal at the school and the teacher and the special ed teacher and the parent caseworker, guardian ad litem, and we'll develop a plan on how this child is going to come back in and be successful in the school. And a lot of times it's you got to, we change it up. We, as you mentioned, we just can't continue to, this is what happened, and then the child left and went away for 9 months, and then we're going to stick him right back in the same situation. So maybe his schedule is different. Instead of maybe starting out in first hour English, now he has PE that some adrenaline and some nervousness can be burned off, and then maybe that child goes to his special ed teacher's room and works there for a couple hours, and then it's lunch, and then maybe there's something else, and then he's done for the day. I've seen schedules where the child, because of various reasons and therapy and treatment, maybe doesn't even enter the school building until 10 o'clock and stays. Maybe they can't even stay for lunch. So we might have to slowly integrate them into a full day of school to make sure that issues just don't arise. And we have to work with the school and the teacher that, if the child starts acting up, it's what have we learned? What can we do? What interventions can we put in place to kind of keep the child in the school and not just blow out? And so it's a long thought out plan. Is it always successful? No, but in general, we do a pretty good job.
Questions for Mr. Belcher? Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
Okay, then we have last one up before public comment, which I will probably not forget, the Wyoming Children's Law Center. Good morning. Still morning. If you'll just introduce yourself for the committee, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you first for this opportunity to be able to talk with you today. This is a very important topic, and I'm very excited to hear it being discussed. I am Donna Sheen. I am the director of the Wyoming Children's Law Center. Our center is a nonprofit that provides legal services that are focused primarily on children's legal issues. So all of the juvenile court is, for example, part of our focus, but also educational legal rights for children and entitlement access to mental health care are also cases that we spend a lot of time on in our practice. But we also work on addressing systemic problems. That's why I'm here today, because when we recognize that there are issues that require a bigger fix, a system fix, then we want to be able to bring our knowledge of what's happening to children to you to be able to help craft solutions that are going to fix the systems that and obviously you've talked a lot about some system fixes. But today I also represent a group that is the Wyoming Youth Justice Coalition. This is a group that is formed in response to the problems that we see, the chronic problems of especially over confinement of youth in Wyoming. And so the coalition and our work has kind of come together to try and make some recommendations of things that we can do to address the problems. Because as many of you know, and we've talked about, Wyoming continues to hold the unfortunate distinction of being among the highest confinement rates in the nation. We've consistently maintained that for many, many years. I've been doing work in juvenile justice for 22 years now, and we have always been up at the top. I did include a handout that's just a one-page front and back. It's the front of a handout that DFS provided to another committee a couple years ago. The reason I included it, though, is I thought it had a very good graphic on the back page. The bottom figure 5 shows our confinement rate line in Wyoming compared to the nation. So even though our confinement rates have been reduced, nationally, that's a trend as well, but we still struggle with having a much higher overall confinement rate for youth. So today I want to talk about some solutions that I think are really important and good first steps. Part of it, I do want to commend to the Department of Family Services. I think their commitment to the Why Home Matters has made a big difference. I will make a big difference in this problem. However, I don't think they alone can solve it. And that's why I'd like to suggest 2 different statutory reform things that this committee could do. The first one would be to implement or require a structured decision process. Structured decision processes, I've included a handout that talks a little bit about them. It's a blue one, but essentially a structured decision process simply means that everybody uses the same set of criteria across the state to be able to decide the best alternatives. And so you get more consistent decisions and are going to, in the end, be able to manage those difficult cases. We've heard a lot and we've spent a lot of time on those tough cases, discussing them. But what we also need to recognize is to free up the resources that we need to do a better job with those hard cases. We have to pay attention to the ones that we maybe are overutilizing confinement that's very costly, and we could recoup those dollars to be able to reallocate. So that handout talks a little bit about what the process is. The reason that I think it needs to be in statute is because while DFS has developed policies that will help move that forward, they are not the decision makers when it comes to that final decision of placement. They are one member of a multidisciplinary team. And so I'm going to talk about it a little more, but just before I do that, there's 2 other things that I think this committee could do that I'll talk about as well. One will be to review our regulations around residential treatment facilities and ensure that these facilities are required to provide evidence-informed care and treatment and prohibit things like solitary confinement that we know are very harmful. And the third thing is a very easy fix, and that is to amend Title 25 to make it clear that it doesn't apply to children, because we've seen it used instead of the Child Protection Act on some children, and that is a problem. So just to kind of get back to the structured decision process, though, I want to talk a little bit about why that would be helpful. And I provided you with another handout that's a 2-pager, and it's titled Wyoming Children's Law Center Request. We obtained this data from the Department of Family Services through a Freedom of Information Act request, and so that's why it's labeled that way. But what it shows is the breakdown of delinquent placements first on the first page by county. So you can see which counties are placing youth, their total numbers through the year. And what I think is very important to note from this is that they don't correlate these numbers with population size in many of the counties, especially some of the more populous counties. And I think there's this sort of belief that part of the reason Wyoming's confinement rates are high is because of our rural nature, that these small communities can't afford to have the array of services needed to keep kids in the community. But I think what these figures show is that that's not our problem. It is some of the smaller counties are doing some very good jobs with keeping kids in those communities. What I think the numbers show are that we have different different communities that think differently about confinement, and so you see it used more or less, depending on the community. For example, in Albany County, you see that there were 19 kids, I think, placed in 2020. They have about 8,500 kids in Albany County, according to the census. When you look at Sweetwater County, they had 109 placements, and their youth population is about 10,500. So if you had the same placement rate in Albany County that Albany County has in Sweetwater County, you would have seen only about 23 and a half kids in confinement in that county. Now, certainly there can be some other differences that might make that change a little bit, but these rates are showing almost 5 times the placement rate of Albany County. Yes.
If I could just interrupt you, could you just clarify what definition we're using here for the phrase juvenile delinquent placement? So are these, when we heard from Director Schmidt, we had, the Boys and Girls School, we had PRTFs, we had residential treatment centers. Could you just clarify what a type of facility is included in this list?
Madam Chair, Chairwoman, yes, this is delinquent placements that would have been through a juvenile court delinquency proceeding. So it does somewhat undercount youth that are in confinement because there are youth who are placed in confinement through municipal and circuit courts as well. So it would not count those confinements. So there could be some differences where communities may use confinement in circuit court, for example, more heavily and might show that they're low here. So it would be important. Yes.
Are these, I don't think these are numbers only for Boys and Girls School. Where are the children, I guess is what I want to know. When you say that have had a delinquency placement, where are they placed?
Madam Chairwoman, that's a very good question too. And if you turn to the second page of that handout, it does also provide the breakdown of where they're confined. And confinement is sort of a term of art. When I say the word confinement, that means you are required to stay there by a court order. So there's certainly the opportunity to let a child go to, say, a psychiatric residential treatment facility and not have to be under court order to do that. But it is generally Wyoming's practice to have courts order that. And so that's why I think you see some of those on the list. And in fact, the second page of this is for the second page is CHIN's placement. So you have this a similar chart that breaks down children in need of supervision confinement based on the county. And then on the second page of that sheet is where they are placed as well. And I would note, even in CHIN's, we see the same disparities between communities in terms of how CHIN's cases are handled. And so, for example, in Albany County, you don't even see them on the list because Albany County has no CHIN's that are placed, whereas Sweetwater County has the 36. So you see, again, that disparity in terms of numbers. And so why does that happen? You know, a lot of it has to do with, I think, the dynamic of who is appointed to the multidisciplinary team, what their training and knowledge is, and the community's sort of belief system about what should happen to children, you know, who are in this situation. And so, for example, in Albany County, they've spent quite a bit of time in their Community Juvenile Service Board developing a very clear, structured decision process that we would hope the agency, Department of Family Services, could develop to implement everywhere. And that process begins, for example, with considering what their educational needs are, that youth, asking the school if they're a child with a disability on an IEP, what the IEP team believes should be the educational placement, the most appropriate one. That question needs to be answered because if the child already is, for example, needing an educational residential placement, then it makes the most sense to leave that situation with the school district and not necessarily have any kind of court process involved. You can just simply monitor that child and make sure they're getting their needs met through that system. The same goes for mental health issues. They look at whether or not the child has been diagnosed with some mental health conditions that require treatment and how that child is going to get the treatments. And if those treatments can be obtained without intervention by the court and managed through the community, then again, that's given a priority in this structured decision process. And so then the third major prong generally of structured decision processes are, but what is the community safety issue? Even if the school district believes that they can manage this child in the community, in the school, but there are serious concerns, say, of after school time and this child doing something very unsafe. That would be the third prong where you would then analyze whether or not you can use heightened supervision in some way, perhaps a group home setting where there's going to be more structured supervision for that youth. And all of those combined, as you can see, really ends up, I think, keeping far fewer children being sent to a facility. Sweetwater, and I say this based on our experience because we do take cases across the state. So we have been involved in a number of cases in Sweetwater. And I would say their system varies in terms of their multidisciplinary team structure, has more of an approach of looking at the behavior. And then generally they start off on probation, and there are terms of probation that the youth has to follow. And while they do look at their treatment needs and also try and ensure that those are met, their process for moving through to the point where that youth is going to be placed in some confinement setting through court order generally is focused mainly on whether or not they've complied with probation terms. So if the student was, or if the youth was ordered to attend school and get passing grades and they're not, that would be a probation violation that could then lead to the court revoking their probation and sending them, for example, to the boys' school or to a residential setting. So you can see that if without the mandate, and I do think it's important to mention a couple things that haven't been brought up around this. And one is that there was a Supreme Court case called Olmstead back in, I think, early 2000 that says that states, when you're building your systems of institutional care, which we're talking about here, you have to be careful that the individuals that you're putting in that institutional level of care can't operate in any other level. And that if they would be able, with services, to be managed in the community, then it is unconstitutional for you to maintain them in an institution. So we have to be mindful of that we don't want to institutionalize youth that don't need to be. And the cost benefit of that, as we've heard discussed around here, is that there is a cost savings to be found in ensuring that we're not putting unnecessary youth in confinement. We can take, for example, if we were to save the placements, say in Sweetwater County, and bring their placement rate down to something similar to Albany County, that would net about a $7 million savings if you consider that it's on average $85,000 per youth for confinement. So there's huge opportunities there in being able to do that. But more importantly is that the research shows that that is the most effective, because many of you were very concerned about some of the outcomes, as was DFS, when they showed you those outcome studies of what happens to youth. And what struck me in our statistics is that 40% of them are going to be showing up in jails and prisons again within 3 years of their aging out of DFS care, right? And so I think we need to be mindful of that and recognize that there are more effective ways of changing youth's behavior. And by structuring, by requiring the state to have one uniform structured way of making decisions about confinement, you also incentivize communities that are overusing it to build the systems in their community that are going to support them. So I provided you with a handout from the American Academy of Pediatrics. It does a nice job of summarizing some of the important research, but as Corin mentioned earlier, most of these youth have experienced trauma. Confinement and multiple confinements just compound that trauma. So while we look for those short-term solutions, in the long run, we're compounding the problem if we don't find a way to stabilize that youth in the community that they're going to be living in. And finally, I included a draft bill just to give you an idea of maybe a way to frame the structured decision process. We did talk with the Judiciary Committee about this issue last interim, but I think what became clear is that really the question of doing this and the thought process and the expertise really resides more appropriately in this committee, because it is really, in a way, a very important part of building that continuum of care for mental health services in the state of Wyoming. So I hope that the committee will consider that recommendation. I also included just a short draft bill of the Title 25 to bring that to your attention. The issue with Title 25 is, I think what happens, it's rare, it's fairly rare, I would say, that children are brought under Title 25 actions. And in my opinion, it usually happens because people who are having to make the decisions just aren't aware of all of the different systems, and that child protection is really built to be the more appropriate response to a crisis like that. And so what you see is that kids are Title 25, and then later on it's sorted out to where they end up needing to file a child protection action, or it ended up them realizing that by doing the Title 25, you've taken away all of the parents' rights, but they have no legal recourse in a Title 25 because there's no provision in there for parents to have due process in a Title 25 of a child. So we just, that to us is just a nice cleanup that we'd like to see the committee do, to just clarify that situations where children are facing emergencies belong in the child welfare, juvenile child in need of supervision, or juvenile court proceeding, and not child welfare. And with that, I know we are nearing the lunch hour, so I want to be mindful of your time. I would be happy to stand for any questions.
So questions for Ms. Sheen? Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Sheen, can you tell us what happened at the Judiciary Committee other than punting to our committee?
Ms. Sheen?
Madam Chair, Representative Conley. I think it was very well received. I think in the end, it failed by a narrow margin when they considered the working draft as to whether they were going to move it forward. And I think a lot of it probably had to do with the focus on whether or not it was needed from the judiciary aspect of whether there needed to be that extra step. And so I think, I don't want to speak for the legislators who didn't vote for it, but I feel like there was less of a focus on the need for it in order to provide good mental health care to youth.
Back to the sort of the data that you provided. So in your experience, and I kind of hate to pick on Sweetwater, but I know back when we were doing Title 25 issues, we picked on Fremont County. So I guess it's somebody else's turn. Does Sweetwater County actually have the community placement opportunities that would, is there bed space in Sweetwater County for these children that are being placed somewhere else?
Chairman Wilson, I think it's more a question of whether or not the mindset is that what intervention is best is really more of the challenge. I don't think that Sweetwater County lacks anything that, for example, Albany County doesn't have access to. Perhaps some would argue maybe Albany County has more professionals because of the university that have the knowledge and expertise to draw on. But I think it probably is more an evolution of we've always done it this way, and so it makes sense, and it feels uncomfortable to not do it, not think of it that way, where we've approached this from the sort of disciplinary approach of we told you not to do it, you did things that we told you not to do, there needs to be a consequence, and that once you've used a consequence once, you should step up to the next consequence. I think in general, most of these youth could be very well maintained in their home with some moderate increase in services, or in some respects, it's been an interesting dynamic because I do serve on the Albany County Juvenile Service Board, and you got to recognize there's a tension sometimes between school districts and prosecutors, because sometimes these school districts would like these children to be in the juvenile justice system because then it's easier to manage, right? And we're not then required as a school district to make sure that we're doing, for example, the functional behavioral assessment that we would be required to do, and providing the positive behavior supports that we would. And, this is a child that maybe has created some drama. Maybe he tore up a schoolroom or something. So there's those kinds of dynamics that are sort of pushing that child into what we call the school to prison pipeline, where they're being referred for behaviors that are usually a disability manifestation, but they are also can be classified as criminal. And so they're pushed into that juvenile justice system. And so it takes, I think, a structured process to help the prosecutor know when to push back and say, this is a child, that child that tore up that schoolroom is a child with a serious emotional disturbance. And that behavior was a manifestation of that. And the law, federal law, requires you, school district, to deal with that on your own. Now, it may include a placement, and you need to look for the proper educational placement. Maybe it's a BOCES, in order to help that child, manage that behavior and learn different behavior. But it's not appropriate to be in the juvenile court. And I think what's missing is in Sweetwater County, I don't think you have that same dynamic of recognizing it. takes a lot of knowledge to understand the full array of what the other service systems are supposed to be doing. So you don't necessarily know to say, this really isn't a child we should be, bringing into the juvenile court, because we need to push back and have that school district providing what they're supposed to first.
I think when we have public comment, if there are folks in the audience or online who can speak to the availability of services in the community for some of the kids, because certainly I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, at the legislative level, if we just change, if we say you need to do X without providing the communities with the resources to do it, then we're not really. And of course, we've heard about the challenge for the legislative appropriations fairy. The other question I have is looking at the bill draft on page 7, there's the change about prohibiting people from under 15 years old of being sent to the boys and girls school. And I guess I would like to understand what kind of change that would cause. How many children are we talking about between 12 and 15 who might be sent somewhere else, and where would those other places be?
And Madam Chairwoman, my apologies too. I forgot that this part was in the bill, and you're refreshing my very old gray-haired memory. That actually was probably a major reason why the bill failed, and it really isn't this part of the structured decision process. It was 2 different things that we were recommending that judiciary do to reduce confinement rates and have them be more appropriate. And so that was, I think, the more controversial part of this bill that probably led it to being not considered and sponsored as a bill. So that would not be part of a structured decision process. And just to go back to your point about whether the community has the resources or not, that certainly is part of a structured decision process. So, but when you're taken through and made to focus on each piece of it separately, you may arrive at a solution where you can keep the youth in the community, and often you can arrive at that. But there are certainly times when, because of the community and the needs of the youth or the safety of the community, you would still need to utilize that out-of-home placement. So that's certainly part of that process.
More questions for Ms. Sheen? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, then, we're not quite at lunch yet, folks, because we would like to hear public comment on this fairly broad issue, mental health services for juveniles with court-ordered placement. So if you are here for public comment, we've got 4 chairs, so just kind of line up front so we can see who we've got. If I can just kind of go left to right, or unless you're together and want to arm wrestle for it, we'll just, okay, ma'am, if you'll just introduce yourself for the committee and tell us what you have in your mind.
Hello. Good morning, Madam Chair and the members of the committee. My name is Michelle Thompson. I am first and foremost a mom of 3 adopted children. One of them is from the foster care system and is one of your tough kids. I am married. We will be celebrating our 30th wedding anniversary in September. I have a degree in occupational therapy, special education, instructional, and a master's in special education and instructional technology. I work for the Wyoming Virtual Academy. My husband works for the mine. He's a former sergeant at the Wyoming Honor Farm. So when we embarked on this journey to adopt from foster care, we felt very prepared. I had already adopted 2 babies, and I thought I knew what I was doing. So when we adopted from foster care in 2012, we fostered in 2012 and finished our adoption in 2014. With that child came a diagnosis of PTSD, ADHD, and an eligibility determination with the education of a learning disability. Sounded okay. I thought we were okay. We had gone through the DFS foster parent training. We took additional training through Wyoming Children's, and I had read books. But by 2015, we knew something was wrong. And I sought brain mapping down in Colorado on our own. And we had done that and got some information on how to do attachment therapy. And that worked for a while. And being an OT, training in autism, we had done a bunch of behavior things. By 2016, it was really bad. And we were having a lot of trouble at home, but it wasn't manifesting at school. So the school wasn't there to help us with that. They were there to help him read and do math. And they were aware, they were helpful, and I'm from Converse County, and so CCSD did a great job helping us. By 2017, we had a couple incidences early spring, and we needed a break. And so we tried a group home placement in Riverton. My parents lived there. And it failed within 2 weeks. They came and called me and said, you got to bring him home. We can't handle him. That's where we were. So school had provided us with wraparound services, which is kind of a great thing to kind of just someone to call and say, we need help. And she got us in to see a neuropsychologist here in Casper. The evaluations we got from DFS were an educational psychology evaluation, which is basically IQ and some academic placement. So we really didn't have, and of course he had the PTSD. We all knew he was traumatized. He came from a meth mom and he was neglected. There were a few domestic violence, but it was mostly neglect. And so we didn't understand until we had a CPS investigation that fall. And it was heartbreaking because we failed. I thought we had failed. Sorry. He to jail? No. He went to YDC that time, which is a little crisis placement. And then we lost custody and we were treated abominably. It was very much a parent reformation process. I was not the expert. I was told I was not allowed to be involved. At one point, we were court ordered to, we were taken to court order medication. But when I explained to the judge that that medication would cause breast development because they weren't monitoring his blood sugars, the judge agreed with me. But it was an awful experience with DFS. But not to throw them under the bus, because we had a second opportunity to work with DFS and they were great. It was just a bad thing. But while he was placed in the PRTF at St. Joe's, we got the RAD diagnosis. We pulled the reactive attachment disorder. That's what RAD is. So what happens in early childhood when you're neglected is your brain begins to not trust your primary caregiver, and you're constantly in your reptilian brain of flight, fight responses. And the more you're consistent, the more you love your child, the more that brain says, danger, you become the nurturing enemy. I am the enemy to my child. I am the gunshot in that PTSD. Every time I go to hug him, I'm dangerous because his brain has told him I'm dangerous. And I have to improve that. And so while he was at St. Joe's, while it didn't help him as much, it gave us the opportunity to get better training. And we went all over the country. We went to Florida, California, and Missouri to get additional training. And our education paid for some of that. The Wyoming our CCSD paid for some of that training. The rest came from my husband's retirement. By the time he got out, we felt okay, but the thing is that that structured tier system, that PRTF is here and home is here. So there's a whole lot of things that need to happen here. So imagine a stroke patient went from acute care home. That's what happened. So that didn't go so well. By October, I had to call the police. By that fall, he was at a level, sanction level 3, and he went to jail. Juvie. He wasn't there very long because by that time, I knew what to ask. I knew what to say. I knew what to ask for at that point. I had lots of books in my head, and I knew what questions to ask, what goals, but I didn't know all that before. And he went to the very wonderful CBARV. So he was there through COVID. And again, the way RAD is treated has to be establishing a trust pattern. So, well, it's not a really great solution because I can't be in Douglas and have him in Jackson and work on a relationship and during COVID. So it did give us opportunity for him to grow, but we had to make a decision of protecting our other 2 children at that point. So this is where DFS came in really handy because they got extremely creative and they really were very helpful. He went on probation, but we had to split. My husband had to live someplace else and I lived someplace else so that we could protect the other children while we worked on establishing our relationship. That was really hard on our marriage. So I wish I had a happy ending to this story, but what happens is that he didn't have any problems because we had a great background team and then we don't need us anymore. So he came off of DFS custody and probation. And that's when the shit hit the fan again because we didn't have that backup team anymore. No one to help us get him to school, no one, no backup plan. And we tried a few things. We tried independent living. He got a couple minor in possession and got put back on probation. He ended up getting battery charge and he turned 18 and then I got no more control. Currently he went back to try to live with his bio family, which are not the best. They still struggle with their own addictions. And he skipped out on probation. So he's back on another year of probation, adult probation this time. He's been to adult jail and I don't know how it's gonna end, but I have great hope. I pray, I hope that it works. But what I'm here to telling you my story is that there are other children and families. These, in the mom groups, they're called glass children because you look through them because you're so busy trying to take care of this tough kid that my other kids didn't want to stress mom out. So I had a kid that tried suicide. We got to stop helping parents right before we fall off the cliff. We need early intervention. And I needed a better assessment for my kid before we adopted him. We needed that neuropsychiatric. He wasn't ADHD. He might have ADHD, but he's hypervigilant is what he is. Thank you. We need to be considered experts alongside the psychologists and the teachers and everyone else. I want to be on that interagency children's collaborative. Our voices are heard because we're working we're doing the job. We stepped up to try to do the job. And, I love my kid. He's our kid. We call him Team Thompson all the time, but he's going to be a tough kid. And I wanted him to be very much a contributing member of Wyoming. A couple of things that I learned at the WAVES conference was put on WDE, really focused on trauma. And one of the things we don't have to have like very intensive 45-minute therapy sessions. The more we train like our educators or the community members of what trauma needs, really in very short snippets of trusted adult interactions, we can change behavior early on. So church members, coaches, all these other people can be contributing to that repetitive trust again of an adult. And that comes from Dr. Perry's work that I've read. Dr. Perry wrote The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. I think that's the name of the book. He worked with the children in Waco. He's got a new book out called What Happened to You? So instead of saying to kids, what's wrong with you? Asking questions like, what happened to you? So anyway, I really encourage you that, I've been through it, CPS, investigation, juvenile justice, probation through circuit court, and now adult probation. So I'm happy to answer. I'm transparent about what happened if you want to ask me any questions, but I just really wanted to share my story with you about why this is really, really important work, and I don't want another mom, dad, auntie, grandmother, cousin to go through with what we did. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. Are there any questions for Mrs. Thompson? Representative Connolly.
Yeah, thank you. And again, just thank you so much for being here, Mrs. Thompson. I've noticed you here, just ready, and that the bravery that you had to come and tell us your story and the reality of your kids' lived experience is second to none. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Chairman and Representative Connolly.
Thank you. Okay.
There. Madam Chairperson, I'm in committee. I'm Bruce Berkland. I'm the director of the Wyoming Youth Service Association. Our association is composed of crisis shelters, group homes.
Could just pull the mic a little bit closer to you. You've practiced not bellowing at people.
Okay. I'm Bruce Berkland, and with the Wyoming Youth Service Association, our programs include group homes, residential treatment centers, St. Joseph's, which is a PRTF. We have 13 group homes across the state and 4 residential treatment centers, including CBRV. And so our programs are a number of the programs that serve the court-ordered placement youth for treatment. And at our group homes, I would say that all of our facilities consider our programs as treatment programs, including our group homes. The kids in the group homes all, I just checked to make sure recently, and all the kids in the group home do receive therapy on a regular basis or are connected with a therapist, and that continues throughout their time with us. At the residential treatment centers, kids have individual group and family therapy, group therapy 3 to 5 times a week, and family therapy and individual at least weekly. So those are treatment programs. Those parts, as Director Schmidt explained, are paid by Medicaid, not by the Department of Family Services, but by Medicaid, and pretty consistently for the programs and over the years, the income we receive from Medicaid is far short of what the costs are of providing that treatment, and that has not gotten any better. And with COVID and the fallout from COVID and staffing and so on, many of our programs at the present time are very short of therapists. And so part of that problem has shown up as, I think you heard that there were 7 kids in detention, or a number of kids in detention waiting for placements like at St. Joseph's. And part of that is they're short 3 therapists, so they can only see X number of children or have X number of children. So we hope to be able to address to some degree that rate issue of working with a colleague and with the department on helping improve that, which would hopefully help improve that situation. I think part of what you just heard was something I was going to mention. We certainly need to do more, and our programs are very involved also in our prevention programs and eager to see more done with that. But I would also emphasize something that doesn't get enough attention is the aftercare and making sure there's a plan in the aftercare part, and that the kids we see come into treatment and the vast majority makes improvements and most continue, but the downfall, the recidivism rates, I think have as much or more to do with the fact of the aftercare doesn't continue. As you heard from our previous speaker, that you return, and that's a problem with Medicaid placement, the placement in a Medicaid facility or a PRTF. Medicaid won't pay for the step down, and so there isn't a payment method for step down. So the services, yeah, you go directly from a very intensive program to home, unless the family can pay for the service and they can find the service. So I think keeping teams in place, and there's a tendency, because there's federal reimbursement and penalty if DFS keeps cases open too long, and how long they can be open. So it's an incentive not to keep it open, because understandably they're penalized for that. But then there isn't a funding mechanism frequently for continued aftercare. And aftercare also involves the coordination between mental health, the judicial system, school systems, a number of people. The team isn't necessarily there, staying coordinated and staying on top and providing that network of support that this woman talked of. So I think that's a very important piece we've been missing, and to look at what those solutions might be also. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Birkeland? Thank you.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, Andy Somerville, Executive Director for WAMSAC, and I know I'm, again, standing between you and lunch, so I will be as brief as possible. I want to touch on...
Let's interrupt there.
Yep.
We're here to try to solve a problem. And I'm not chastising you. I'm just saying, you know what? If we have to go hungry for another 15 minutes, I think that's okay. So keep on going.
Will do, Madam Chairman. I want to step back to the part of the presentation earlier this morning when Director Schmidt was presenting, looking at identified problems, and there was a lot of discussion around the Wyoming Boys School. So the Wyoming Boys School is served by the Community Mental Health Center in that area. So we've certainly seen some challenges in that area. So that program underwent a pretty large budget cut a few years ago. There's certainly some conversation about right sizing versus do we right size it correctly, right? I won't go too far into that, but there's still conversation about areas that were cut and did it reduce services. They used to have 3 counselors and a case manager that were specifically assigned to work at the Wyoming Boys School. After the budget cuts, the Community Mental Health Center had to pull one of those because of the reduction in funding up there. And then what I understand is that the second therapist gave their notice just a few days ago. So we are down to 1 therapist and a case manager. I cannot underscore for the committee enough how difficult it is to hire mental health professionals. And I know we've talked about this at length, but that hiring of mental health professionals in an area like Worland, if I can just pick on them for a minute, it's difficult. And the reimbursements that we receive, either through Wyoming Boys School, reimbursements are run through Medicaid, but it's a Chart B program, there's no federal match. Those reimbursements do not allow us to pay those therapists in a manner that will recruit them potentially to Worland. So while we still work on and want to talk about rates and the money coming into the system, it's also really important that we start to have a pretty serious conversation about growing our own. If we have somebody that's interested in another vein of mental health, like they're working as a residential tech at the crisis stabilization unit, and they want to stay, we need to figure out how to put them through college and let them pursue that degree while they're still working in the community mental health system. We don't have scholarships or a program right now that would go forward to that. Most of our mental health therapists will go for loan forgiveness through the HRSA program if they work at a center, but that's after they're already educated and gone to work. But we need to keep them working while we're working on a degree program with them.
Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andy, let me ask about, of course, we're hearing this over and over again, that we don't have enough of those professionals. Are you working with the university at all to get interns over summer months, et cetera, that can experience these situations that might lead to them wanting to continue on long-term?
Somerville.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Furphy, we are. I have had several conversations with the Dean of both the College of Education, where the Licensed Professional Counselor Program is housed, and the Dean of the College of Health Sciences and the Social Work Department in particular. Both of those programs are in the middle of kind of rewriting how they're working on that with a focus on moving out towards serving statewide and trying to get students collected in a hybrid program with some online options, so they can do most of their work online and then maybe come in for, an intensive 3-day weekend or something along those lines. We think that those are really, really important because we need to have those programs established to help us with the grow your own type of programming. So we are in conversations with them to try to be as helpful as we can. The community mental health centers have offered to serve as clinical sites. We will take any intern we can find in community mental health, and we do. We work with them already on that too, but we think it's pretty important to kind of move those pieces of the program forward.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, with your permission, I want to switch to a different topic just for the committee. Everything that has been said today in terms of the difficulties, we certainly agree with. Under-resourced comes up frequently in this line of work. We want to talk just real briefly about Title 25 and kids. So I think that the goal of every provider, and certainly our partners that we work with, is to not have to put a person under the age of 18 on a Title 25. However, I want to state that, first of all, that happens very rarely. It's usually the absolute last-ditch option that we have. But unfortunately, because we lack appropriate placements, and for a Title 25, that youth is either at significant harm, risk of harming themselves or harming others. These are youth that are in not a very good place. And so the reality is we don't have anywhere to send them. We also have these kids where we get called to assess. Again, it doesn't happen very often, but the parents can't be found, or the parents are involved in neglect. And so it becomes difficult to navigate the legal process to try to keep that youth safe while we're waiting on the court system. We always work with DFS and CHIN's petitions and things along those lines, but on more than one occasion, Title 25 has become a tool necessary to keep that child safe, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, while we're working through the system, trying to find them a placement. Most of these children would probably not be immediately appropriate to be placed in a group home, which is our most frequently community resource. And then also residential treatment centers are trying to get them into a PRTF. That takes some time. Additionally, a Title 25 hold allows us, if WBI has room, to move them to WBI, which is already a PRTF. And what we find is that if the clinician and the hospital use a Title 25 tool, it's for a very short time, and then often it's transitioned with working with the parents and DFS to a voluntary hold, and we take them off of that Title 25. So the concern from my providers is removing that tool from the toolbox. I don't know quite what we're going to do without that in these fairly rare, but they do happen, circumstances. So right now, my directors are asking for the community mental health centers to leave that tool in place, not because we disagree with why we want to take it off. But until we have a better resource situation, Director Schmidt talked about the high needs adolescent policy work group project, right? We need to have a better situation of where we could potentially send those kids immediately, so that they're not going to jail, because that's not where we want these kids. We don't want them in a jail cell because there's nowhere else to put them. They may not be eligible for a group home or an RTC because of the level of violence or behaviors or et cetera. Until we have a better system, we're asking that that tool be left in place for a little while. With that, Madam Chair, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Somerville? I do have one question going back to some notes I took when Ms. Thompson was talking. And this committee for a number of years now has been talking without really an answer yet, but for the sort of step down, transitional aftercare type situation. Do you think that the behavioral health reform process and prioritization of children and families in that, do you think that that has will be a tool to help this, or do you think we need more tools still? I mean, given the reality of the resources.
Madam Chairwoman, so in general, I think yes, and I think it's something we need to give a shot. So in the purposes of behavioral health reform, these are part of the priority populations now. So as we've been working through these meetings, and in fact, we have a meeting here in Casper next Wednesday to talk about this same thing, we're looking and working on a pilot project where there's a couple of those priority populations that are going to be priority starting for the next fiscal year. One of those priorities is people coming out of institutions. That includes being discharged from a PRTF or like a director's kind of special placement high needs kids when we can help them. We need to get that working and in place. And I think that's going to do a couple of things, but maybe the most important is that the community mental health centers are the safety net, right? When parents don't have resources to maybe pay for other treatment or other options. By working on a transition process where that community mental health center, that community is going to know about that child, hopefully engage in discharge planning, work with the family to find resources, and maybe those resources, ultimately they decide not to come to the community mental health center, but offering those resources to both the child and the family, I think is important. It's an important step. Often the community mental health center doesn't necessarily know about a child or an adolescent unless they walk in the door with their parents. We get called to the hospital to do an evaluation or something along those lines. So in the past, we've not been involved in any of that process. So we do hope that it'll help. And again, that pilot project is hopefully going to start July 1 for FY24, so July of next year.
Okay. All right, thanks very much. Oh, were you going to? Oh, no, okay. Okay, I think Ms. Simoneau beat you up here, so if that's okay, we'll just.
All is well. My name is Lindsay Simoneau. I represent the Wyoming Counseling Association. I'm just wanting to highlight some information that hasn't yet been presented today, specifically when DFS presented on licensed counselors in elementary, middle, and high schoolers today. In August of 2020, the Wyoming Department of Education was rewarded a 5-year grant for something called Project Aware. What Project Aware is doing is putting licensed mental health providers in schools that children of school age can use with their parents' permission. This is a 5-year program. It is temporary, but what we are seeing is a slow rollout with promising results. Currently, the program is in Campbell County, Carbon County, Fremont County, Park County, Sweetwater, and I always say it wrong, Unita? Yay! Additionally, they are getting ready, or they have it in Bighorn County in 3 of their districts and Park County using ARP funds. We're excited to see this happen. We're excited to see the promise of this, but it is temporary. And so I do want to highlight that this is being rolled out by Wyoming Department of Education, and we'll hopefully have results on this in a few years. As well as the federal funds that were approved in June in the recent gun legislation bill. There is money for states to engage in similar school programs. We know that's there. We have no other information on that at this time, but would like to highlight that that is also another reason resource that Wyoming can engage in later on down the road, though it is temporary funds. And then finally, I would be punished if I didn't mention from my board member that the UW Counseling Hybrid Program out of Casper College has nearly a 100% retention rate as far as keeping their graduates in the state, because most of those students are already employed in social service settings, and they take those degrees and use them within their employment. So we are seeing that success on a small scale. The counseling department is working on making that a statewide program at this time.
Awesome. Questions for Ms. Semino? It's Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Semino, just for your information to keep in the back of your head, the recalibration process for the K through 12 education system happens a minimum of once every 5 years. And in it, there is what we call affectionately Attachment A, which are all of the components that go into our educational model. And though we haven't changed that Attachment A much over the past, actually since 2010, that every recalibration consultant has recommended increases in K through 12 counselors, and we haven't adopted it. And so again, for you to keep in the back of your mind for your organization to perhaps participate in that next process so that we reconsider that recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Lindsay, on the licensed professional counselors in the schools, given that we've heard that there's sort of a shortage, are these people who are practicing elsewhere in the community, and now the education system is just going to basically certify them to also work in the schools, or have you found a magical source of more licensed professional counselors?
Madam Chairman, yes and no. It's not so much that we have found another, we don't have a professions fairy. I don't know if she's hanging out with the appropriations fairy, but here we are.
They've gone to lunch.
I can tell you that the majority of our school counselors in school settings, the way that they are school counselors is that they have clinical counseling licensure, and they maintain their school counseling credential by maintaining that clinical counseling licensure. What we're seeing happen, it depends on county, is either school districts contracting with community providers to provide that service and bring them in contractually. We're also seeing telehealth be used as well. So we're seeing those two components, either somebody's already hired, contracting within the community, or telehealth.
Okay, great. Okay. If you'll just introduce yourself for the committee. I find another place. Oh, I have more room on the back. Okay.
Madam Chairwoman, I'm Eleanor Downey. I'm the Director of the Division of Social Work at the University of Wyoming. And perhaps my comments and responses to questions might be more appropriate this afternoon. But I can speak to what we are doing at the University of Wyoming to increase the number of social workers in the state of Wyoming. And our retention rate within the state is also really, really high. But social workers provide the majority of services related to mental health and substance use.
We'd be glad to hear. I mean,
Okay.
we don't want you to duplicate what you might get say this afternoon, but.
Well, the Board of Trustees of the University of Wyoming has graciously given us the money to double our master's program. And come fall of 2023, we will be offering a part-time Master's in Social Work program out of the Casper campus. It is a part-time program designed for working adults so that people can continue to keep their jobs and go to school on the weekends. It is the identical program to the one that's accredited in Laramie. We've just stretched it out. And that, I think, should begin to help the situation. We tend to draw non-traditional students that are already rooted in Wyoming. I think some of the points that Ms. Somerville made are right on the money. Loan forgiveness goes a long way. I have students graduating with over $100,000 worth of student loans. And although social workers are paid well in Wyoming, actually we're paid a little better here than we are in a lot of Western states. It's still to take on that kind of loan debt when you're only maybe making $60,000 a year and supporting a family is extremely difficult. And that is a big incentive for people to take jobs. The other thing I've been working with DFS is that there is 4E federal money to train child protection workers. And that money, which I have used in other institutions of higher education, will pay for 1 year of an undergraduate and or 1 year of a graduate student to finish their education. Their internship would be in family services, and then they are required to remain in Wyoming and repay that debt by 2 years of employment. My past experience with 4E money is that the state would have a say in what that requirement is. And if the student chooses to leave the state, then there is a repayment policy. But I saw that program work really effectively in Idaho when I taught there. It drew students to our institution, and it also helped supply workers for DFS. And I think too, that if the system were set up so that DFS workers had clinical training, some of those clinical services, the family therapy services, might be provided by DFS rather than having to always outsource them.
So has this been started using the 4E money, or is there anything that you need statutorily from us, or is that just a funneling from DFS to
Initially,
you?
we had the money, and with the budget cutbacks, it went away. What it requires is that it's going to come off of some of the block grant to DFS. And I've talked with Corin, and I'm working with Danielle Marks. We're looking at some other options to try to bring this money into the state.
Because from my time on appropriations, I thought I was remembering that we were not actually able to draw down all the 4E money potentially available because of I don't know, shortage of the demographic group or something. Does that make any sense? It's been some years.
I've only been here 3 years, but met with Danielle this week, and she is going to give me the history.
Super. Questions for Dr. Downey? Awesome.
Thank
We
you.
look forward to more things from along that line. Okay, any other public comment before we break for lunch? Okay, then let's see, what time we got? 12:15. We're not doing, well, we're only 45 minutes behind today. We're doing butter. Okay, so let's come back at 1:30. Unless you have a different time in mind. No, 1:30 is wonderful. Okay, all right. We'll see everybody back at 1:30. Thank you.